Okay, hello, good evening. Oh, that was so fast. Good evening, my name is Tegan Dolan. I'm the Executive Director of the Newport program here at Albany Law School. It is my honor to welcome those of you in person and those of you joining us on Zoom to the final round of the Karen C Mcgovern Senior Prize Trials competition. As with any Newport competition, or really any law school undertaking, putting on this competition requires a lot of effort, specifically from the competition chair, Kristen Abele, and the competition associate, Jaclyn Yoselevich. It often isn't until the final big round and subsequent reception that the chair and associate really get any credit for the countless hours they've spent reserving rooms, making schedules, coordinating competitors, judges, bailiffs, and not to mention actually writing the problem that the competition is based on. On top of all of that, Kristen and Jackie somehow remained flexible and accommodated COVID concerns, participant dropouts. So when you watch this competition come to life with the skill and tenacity of our 4 wonderful final round competitors, please also remember the dedication as well as the skill and tenacity of both Jackie and Kristen, the 2 lovely ladies who honestly dedicated so much of their time to provide this opportunity for everybody. So without further ado, and before I start making any Tiger King jokes, which I really wanted to do, but promised I wouldn't, I will pass it over to the faculty advisor, Professor Jim, to kick off the competition. Thank you.
So thank you, Tegan, and I want to extend my thanks to the entire Newport board before I single out Kristen and Jaclyn specifically. This is an undertaking of the entire Newport board. While Kristen and Jaclyn are the ones writing the problem and coordinating the judges and scheduling the room, the entire board chips in for every competition, and it's great to see them all come together. This is the first time that the McGovern Senior Prize Trials competition is 1 semester only. It's the first time in the fall. So I used to be able to say thank you for coming to celebrate the final event of the Newport season. I cannot say that anymore, but at least we can kick off what I hope to be and what I expect to be a very entertaining competition. I have not seen any rounds yet. I always save it for the final. There are many people we need to thank. And not least of all, first Judge Stewart, Judge Dan Stewart. I spoke with Judge Stewart earlier this afternoon. This is his 3rd year, 3rd consecutive competition that he has judged. And I joke that if he hits 5 years, right, 5 consecutive competitions, maybe he'll get a car or something. So we'll see. Okay. The members of the faculty, the administration, who support all of the Newport programs. Some couldn't be here tonight, but specifically Dean Willett and Dean Devin, who's the faculty advisor for the Newport program. Kristen and Jaclyn, I spoke with them over the summer, and they first told me that they wanted to do something Tiger King related. I only watched the first episode, and I couldn't get past it. But the more I read the problem, I was like, all right, I think this can work. I'm looking for to see how it comes together. We went through many different types of exhibits and different pieces of evidence, and I'm looking forward to seeing our 4 finalists. There's also many people behind the scenes who don't actually ever hear of until you go to the thank yous, but they're integral to this competition. Least of all, many of you know Teresa Colbert, the administrative assistant for the Newport board. None of this would happen without her. So all of our thanks go out to her. Bill Purcell and his ITS team, especially now when all the competitions are streamed live, which we never used to do. Julie Pierce, the printing office, who printed all the programs that all of you have today. Ben Myers and Tom Torriello, I think Tom here tonight, from the communications department, his team. And some of the administrative support is from John Collins and Marcus Polinsky. Those people I mentioned don't get mentioned a lot, but none of this would happen without them. So I extend my thanks to them. Before I move on to this, our 4 finalists, I want to thank all those who competed this year. It's not an easy thing to do. These trials can last a long time, unlike other competitions. There's a lot of, the record is very extensive. And I want to thank all of those who competed for bringing this competition to life. With that, I now turn to the 4 finalists. So Nicholas, Aaron, Lisa, and Nora, good luck. Looking forward to see what you all do with this.
Thank you to our sanitizer, Caitlin Curtin. So hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Abele. Thank you for the wonderful introduction from Tegan Dolan and Professor Jim. On behalf of the Albany Law School Newport program, I would like to welcome you all to the final round of the Fall 2021 Karen C. McGovern Senior Prize Trials Competition. So as Professor Jim mentioned, the Karen C. McGovern Senior Prize Trials has traditionally been a year-long competition in which you would litigate civil problem in the fall and a criminal one in the spring. We changed it this year, and this was the first year that we made it a 1-semester criminal problem. And with that, there was a lot of administrative changes. So I would like to thank my associate, Jaclyn Yoselevich, especially. More thank yous later to come, but just initially that was a huge change, and I thank her for that. Now, our finalists tonight, as Professor Jim mentioned, are Nora Baker and Lisa Hladik will argue for the prosecution, and Aaron Kane and Nicholas Kitzrow for the defendant. And their presence here tonight, these finalists, is a testament, I think, to the amount of time and hard work they have devoted to this competition thus far. We had a large amount of teams sign up, and I watched a lot of trials over the last 2 months, let me tell you. And these 4 individuals right here are equally amazing, and I know we'll put on an amazing show for you tonight. So just congratulate them on being finalists in the first place. Now, this competition is dedicated to the memory of the late Karen C. McGovern. Ms. McGovern would have graduated Albany Law School with the class of 2001, but passed away during her 2nd year. During the 2001 commencement, her mother accepted the Isabel Redmond Award, which recognized Karen's courage, perseverance, and grace in confronting extraordinary challenges. More about Karen can be seen in the program that was handed to you this evening. Now, the trial tonight results from an arrest and indictment of Charlie Baker in relation to an incident and the death of Devin Lee at New Catlin Rescue on March 7th, 2020. Now, as Professor Jim mentioned, this case is loosely based on a popular Netflix documentary, Tiger King. So I don't know if many of you have seen it, but it's a very colorful documentary, and we had a lot of fun basing this problem around it. I say loosely based because the facts in this problem are a lot different than the documentary, but we had a great time, and I would be lying. Jaclyn was the one who mentioned to me, what if we did Tiger King? So I have to give that credit for her. She gave me the idea to do it, and just the amount of fun that we've had with it, the witnesses, the costumes, it's been quite the ride. So thank you for that, Jaclyn. Now, tonight's judge presiding is the Honorable Daniel J. Stewart. Judge Stewart is a United States Magistrate Judge for the Northern District of New York and was appointed in 2015. Judge Stewart is a native of Warren County and received his Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Notre Dame in 1985 and his JD from Albany Law School in 1988. He was a trial attorney and partner at the law firm Dreyer Boyajian LLP for 15 years, and then with Brennan and White LLP in Queensbury, New York for 10 years until the time of his appointment. Now, finally tonight, I will be speaking later with some thank yous, but I would just like to wish both teams luck. And now with that, it is my great pleasure to turn the proceedings over to tonight's bailiff. When you're ready, bailiff. Thank you, everyone.
All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Daniel Stewart presiding. Please proceed.
All right, good evening, everyone. We're here in the matter of State of New Scotland versus Charlie Baker. The record can reflect that we're in open court. The jury's been seated. Is the prosecution prepared to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is the defense prepared as well?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me ask, are there any preliminary matters that we need to issue? Why don't you start first by introducing yourselves to the jury?
Nora Baker for the people. Lisa Hladik for the defense.
All right, excellent. Are there any preliminary matters on behalf of the prosecution you would like to address?
Yes, Your Honor, we do have a couple of preliminary matters. The people would ask for Your Honor's preference for moving around the courtroom tonight.
I won't restrict you to just behind the desk. You can move and you can show items to the witness if you wish. Don't make it so I'm nauseous.
Thank you. We would also request that all objections to opening and closing statements be reserved until the conclusion of those statements respectively.
All right, any objection as to that?
Your Honor, we only object as to any possible burden shifting statements. Other than that, no objection.
All right, I'll grant your motion. If there's any issue with regard to burden shifting or anything else, I'll issue a curative instruction. I don't expect it would happen.
We would also like to place on the record that the people in defense did stipulate that Dr. R. Swanson, the witness for the prosecution, has been a physician for the last 15 years. In his career, he has performed over 75 autopsies. We would also like to put on the record that the people in defense stipulated that Exhibit 12, the boulder, is the actual boulder that was removed from the scene on March 8th, 2020, and all pictures of Exhibit 12 are fair and accurate representations. And finally, we would like to put on the record that the people in defense stipulated that the medical report prepared by Dr. Swanson, number 2337471, and Exhibit 14, the anatomy diagram, are admissible and are both fair and accurate representations of the diagram and of the report.
All right, excellent. All right, anything from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. First, we just like to ask your permission, or rather your preference, we would ask your permission before approaching witnesses at the stand.
You may do that. I think that's appropriate. All right, very good. Well, the state of New Scotland has the burden of proof in this case, so are you prepared with your opening?
Yes.
All right, you may proceed.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. This is a case about a murder, opportunity, and a person who had everything to lose. On the morning of March 8th, 2020, the body of the victim, Devin Lee, was found in a tiger enclosure in Newport Rescue. The victim's body had his skull crushed and his body torn to shreds by the tiger that lived in that enclosure. And you are here today because of the reason why Devin Lee ended up in that enclosure. The evidence and the testimony that you will hear today will show that Devin Lee was sent off a high platform in that enclosure to his death to that vicious tiger. And the evidence will show that the only person who was at Newport Rescue at the time that Mr. Lee was sent to his death was a person who had everything to lose, a person who had an opportunity to get rid of all of those problems by getting rid of Mr. Lee. And that person is the defendant, Mr. Charlie Baker. The victim, Devin Lee, and Charlie Baker were married for 25 years. And for 22 years, together, they ran Newport Rescue, which was a sanctuary for big cats. In fact, in that time, they had even built their home at that rescue together. But tonight, you will hear how in the span of one night, the defendant, Mr. Baker, learned that he was about to lose everything. Mr. Baker stood to lose his husband, Devin Lee, because Devin was ready to walk out on their marriage for someone else. And Mr. Baker stood to lose his life's work, Newport Rescue, because when Devin left,
he was taking the money from the rescue with him. And you will have to ask yourselves, who was the one person who was going to take everything away from Mr. Baker? That was the victim, Devin Lee. And who was the one person who was at New Catlin Rescue the night that Devin Lee fell to his death? That person was the defendant, Mr. Charlie Baker. Tonight, you will hear evidence and see testimony that there were several marital problems between Mr. Baker and Devin Lee. The couple was fighting more and more. Devin was drinking more and more. And frankly, the defendant, Mr. Baker, was making business decisions that Devin did not agree with. And one of those major decisions was to bring an aggressive tiger with an aggressive history to New Catlin Rescue, despite Devin's opposition. And because of that, Devin was terrified of that tiger and would never voluntarily go near her. And as it turns out, Mr. Baker's decision to bring that tiger to the rescue would turn deadly on the night of March 7th, 2020, which was the night that Devin Lee was killed in that very tiger's enclosure. And you will also hear how on the night of March 7th, 2020, all of the marital problems between Devin Lee and Mr. Baker came to a boiling point. On that day, New Catlin Rescue was having the biggest event that it had ever had in its history. And in the middle of that event, Devin Lee left. He left his responsibilities at New Catlin Rescue and Mr. Baker to go drink at a bar called the Cat's Meow. And Mr. Baker knew it. And when Devin Lee came home that night, it was another night where Devin was drinking and the couple was fighting. But this fight was different because Mr. Baker knew about Devin's affair with Lola Lovelace. And Mr. Baker knew that Devin was taking money out of New Catlin Rescue at the same time. And that night, Mr. Baker also knew that Devin was too drunk to see anything coming. Tonight, you will hear from two witnesses for the prosecution. First, you will hear from the medical examiner, the chief medical examiner of New Scotland, Dr. Ron Swanson. Dr. Swanson will tell you about the autopsy that he performed on the victim, Devin Lee's body, and he will tell you about his examination of the physical evidence at the scene of the Tiger Enclosure. And Dr. Swanson's testimony will tell you that Devin Lee's death was a homicide and that it was no accident. And second, you will hear from Joe Eagle, a man who has also been in the big cat business for decades and who has been friends with Devin Lee just as long and who has known the defendant, Charlie Baker, just as long. And Joe will tell you how he saw Devin Lee out at the Cat's Meow, that bar, with Devin Lee. And Joe will tell you how he knew about Devin's plans to leave Mr. Baker for Lola Lovelace, and how Devin Lee had plans to leave New Catlin Rescue with his money to strike it out on his own. And most importantly, Joe will tell you how on the night of March 7th, 2020, he was one of the last people to talk to Devin Lee while he was still alive, when he was in a rush to leave the Cat's Meow to go back to New Catlin Rescue that night and reveal everything to Charlie Baker. Tonight, you are also going to hear testimony from the defense. They're going to tell you a story about a lot of coincidences that happened on the night of March 7th, 2020. They're going to tell you how Mr. Baker just so happened to discover Devin's affair, and how Mr. Baker just so happened to discover that Devin was taking money out of New Catlin Rescue, and how a few hours later on that same night, how Devin Lee just so happened to fall to his death in the enclosure of a tiger that Devin was terrified of. We submit to you that this just does not add up. Instead, we the people submit to you that when you look at all of the facts and add them together, your common sense will lead you to one conclusion: that Devin Lee was the victim of homicide, and that Mr. Baker had everything to gain and every opportunity to take care of Devin Lee that night when Devin was drinking. And for those reasons, we ask at the end of this trial that you find the defendant, Charlie Baker, guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel. Does the defense wish to make an opening at this time?
We do, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. If it may please the court. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the prosecution's burden to prove that Charlie Baker is guilty beyond all reasonable doubt. But there are doubts, and those doubts are not only reasonable, they are convincing. The prosecution will tell you a story filled with romance and revenge, and a level of drama filled with a television soap opera. It will appeal to your emotions, but not to your common sense. The evidence against Charlie Baker is merely circumstantial at best, a patchwork of guesses and conjecture with no basis in cold hard facts. Tonight, you will see absolutely no eyewitnesses. There will be no murder weapon. There will be no audio recordings, no video footage, no DNA evidence connecting Charlie to the scene, no footprints, no fingerprints, nothing. Devin Lee's death was tragic, and it was devastating, but it was not a crime. Tonight, you'll hear from Charlie Baker himself, who will testify under oath that the last time he saw his husband, Devin Lee, was when he left the New Jaclyn Rescue Office on the night of March 7th, 2020. You'll also hear from Aidan Cooper, a longtime employee who knew Charlie Baker and Devin Lee as well as anyone could. Aidan will testify as to how Devin Lee became a different person with his drinking, and how much Charlie Baker truly loved his husband. Ladies and gentlemen, that burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, tell me if this sounds reasonable to you. On the morning of March 7th, 2020, Devin Lee went to work, where he started drinking. He continued to drink and then eventually left work, shirking his duties to go to the bar to continue to drink. Eventually, Devin Lee left the bar and returned back to his home and place of work in Jaclyn Rescue, extremely intoxicated. Too intoxicated to drive home, too intoxicated to even remember to pay his bartender, far too intoxicated to have a serious conversation about his marriage. So he took a little walk instead. He wandered over to the animal enclosure nearest to the office, made his way inside the enclosure, which would not have been the first time that he drunkenly made his way into an animal enclosure. And once inside, his extreme intoxication, in conjunction with the side effects caused by the medicine he was taking, resulted in him falling off of the ledge of the enclosure, hitting his head on a rock below, killing him. Now, the prosecution would have you believe that this simple and straightforward explanation is somehow impossible. Yet Occam's razor tells us that the least complicated theory is the best one. The one that requires the least amount of mental gymnastics and imaginary scenarios. Now, I imagine that each one of you has met a lot of different people in the course of your lives. Let's pretend that we took every single person that every one of you has ever met and put them in one room. That's a lot of people. Now, all those people in that room, how many of them do you know that has ever lured their spouse into a tiger cage to try to murder them? Not a very common occurrence, is it? Let's go back to that room with all those people. How many of those people in that room have you ever seen fall over as they drank to excess? Not a very uncommon occurrence, is it? Now, only Devin Lee can tell us precisely what happened on the night of March 7th, 2020. Only he can tell us for sure whether he stumbled and fell, whether he leapt off in an act of despair and guilt, whether a stranger in the night decided to commit a random act of violence. There's simply not enough evidence to form a conclusion, especially a conclusion that requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Charlie Baker cannot be convicted of a crime that there is no proof of. A crime invented by the prosecution to punish someone left heartbroken and devastated by the loss of his husband. The justice system is built on one simple yet absolutely fundamental principle. You are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Tonight, we begin by presuming that Charlie Baker is innocent. We're here to see if the people can meet their burden by showing that Charlie Baker is guilty beyond all reasonable doubt. All. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask only that you hold the people to their burden. The burden that requires them to present evidence so convincing and so overwhelming that it erases every single possible doubt you have about their story. We're confident that you'll see how difficult this burden is to meet and how easy it is to see that Charlie Baker is innocent. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, counsel. All right, is the government prepared with their first witness?
Yes.
All right, Dr. Swanson, come to the stand. All right, Dr. Wan, I have you sworn in.
Raise your right hand. Swear to tell the truth of what you're about to say.
Yes, I did. All right, you may begin.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Swanson. Can you please state your name for the record?
Ron Swanson.
What is your occupation?
I'm Chief Medical Examiner,
Where do you currently work?
the New Scotland Office of Chief Medical.
And how long have you worked at that office?
Roughly 7 years.
And as a medical examiner, could you please describe your duties?
Yes, we are responsible for determining the identifications of the victims who come into our office, as well as determining the cause of death, as well as aiding in investigations.
Do you have any additional duties as the chief medical examiner?
Yes, I oversee all investigations, as well as have the final sign off on causes of death.
And in your career, how many autopsies have you performed?
Over 75.
Dr. Swanson, what is your educational background?
In 1998, I graduated from the University of New Scotland with a bachelor's in animal biology. And in 2004, I graduated from the New Scotland Gym School of Medicine with my MD.
Where did you work after you had attended school?
From 2004 to 2006, I participated in a fellowship at the New Scotland Memorial Hospital in continuation of my medical training, as well as from 2006 to 2014, I was a professor at the Gym School of Medicine teaching forensic pathology.
And how long did you teach forensic pathology?
Roughly 8 years.
Do you have any licenses or certifications?
Yes, I've been licensed as a medical examiner since 2004, as well as been board certified in forensic pathology since 2006.
And are you a member of any professional boards or associations?
Yes, the American Medical Association, as well as the National Association of Medical Examiners.
At this time, Your Honor, I would like to tender the witness as an expert in forensic pathology.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so noted.
Dr. Swanson, do you recall being called to a scene at New Catland Rescue?
I do.
What was the date?
March 8th of 2020.
And at what time did you respond to that call?
7:32 in the morning, roughly.
And where within the rescue were you directed?
To a Tiger Enclosure.
What were your initial observations of the scene?
At the scene, there were the remains of a human male in his 50s, and the tiger that had previously been housed there had been tranquilized and removed from the scene.
Did you collect any items from the scene?
Yes, I did. We bagged all materials, as well as transported the remains of the victim to our office, as well as took pictures of the scene.
How did you document your investigation that day?
2 pictures.
Please let the record reflect that I am showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 11 for identification purposes. It has been stipulated that this is a fair and accurate representation of the Tiger Enclosure. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Dr. Swanson, do you recognize what I've just handed to you?
Yes, I do. This is the picture that I took of the tiger.
At this time, Your Honor, I move for what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 11 to be moved into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, that's admitted.
Dr. Swanson, looking at Exhibit 11 and your observations from March 8th, could you please describe the Tiger Enclosure?
Sure. There's a wooden platform roughly 15 feet off the ground. On the ground, there's grass as well as several landscaping boulders. To get up to the top of the platform, there's a wooden ramp, and there is a door that is passable.
And And could you further describe the platform and the door pictured in Exhibit 11?
Yes, there's a wired fence around as well, and the door is passcode.
And is this door situated on the ground?
No, it is up top of the wooden ramp.
And where within the enclosure did you find the victim's body?
Over by this red X, where several landscaping boulders are.
Please let the record reflect that the witness has indicated the red X marked on Exhibit 11 as the place where he found the victim's body.
All right, the record will so reflect.
Did you perform an initial examination of the victim at the scene?
Yes, I did. When I first examined the victim, he had appeared to be torn to shreds by the tiger that was housed in the enclosure. His skin and muscles had been torn from his legs, but his limbs had remained attached to his body. As a whole, he was very disfigured.
And at this, and on this day, were you able to determine the time of death?
Yes, I can determine with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that the time of death was between 8 and 10 p.m. on March the 7th.
And did you conduct a second examination of the body at your office?
Yes, I did.
And at that time, were you able to identify the victim?
Yes, the victim was Devin.
And how did you make that identification?
Through his dental records.
And while you were making this second examination, how did you document your observations?
Through my medical report as well as an anatomical diagram.
What the record reflects that I'm showing opposing counsel with the marks as Exhibit 14 for identification purposes. It has been stipulated that this is a fair and accurate representation of the doctor's anatomy diagram, and we also stipulated to its admissibility. May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Dr. Swanson, do you recognize what I've just handed to you?
Yes, I do. This is my anatomical diagram.
And how do you recognize it to be your anatomical diagram?
I myself made this diagram.
Your Honor, may I publish to the jury?
Yes, you may.
Now, Dr. Swanson, looking at your anatomical diagram, what are these numbers that are pictured here?
They correspond to the wounds suffered by Devin Lee.
And after you had examined all the wounds on Devin Lee's body, in your expert opinion, were you able to determine the cause of death?
I was. It's on the back of the victim's skull, marked number 11.
What was the nature of this wound, number 11?
It was a depressed fracture.
And were you able to determine what had caused the depressed fracture that's labeled number 11 on this diagram?
Yes, the wound number 11 was caused when the victim came into contact with a landscaping boulder.
And were you able to determine how the victim had come into contact with this landscaping boulder?
Yes, he was likely shoved or sent off of the platform pictured in exhibit number 11.
And were you able to determine which boulder had struck Mr. Lee in the back of his head?
Yes, it had been removed from the scene, but it sat where the red X is on exhibit number 11.
And based on your observations that day and looking at exhibit number 11, what was the placement of the boulder in relation to this platform?
Several feet away from the platform, quite a bit of distance.
And is the boulder pictured in exhibit 11?
No, it is not. We removed it from the scene for further evaluation.
And did you document your evaluation of the boulder?
Yes, through pictures.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel with the trademark as exhibit 12 for identification purposes. We've previously stipulated that this is a fair and accurate representation of the boulder that Dr. Swanson removed from the scene. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Dr. Swanson, do you recognize what I've just handed to you?
Yes, that is a picture of the picture I took of the boulder in question.
At this time, Your Honor, I move for what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 12 to be moved into evidence.
All right, any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, that is admitted.
May I publish to the jury?
Yes, why don't you collect what you published before and provide this?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Swanson, how would you describe the boulder pictured in Exhibit 12?
It's quite large and it juts out at its northern edge.
And what are these materials pictured on the boulder?
Blood secretions, as well as there were skin tissues and human hair.
Did you test those materials on the boulder?
I did, and they belong to the victim, Devin.
And how were you able to determine in your expert opinion that this boulder had caused the fracture to the back of Mr. Lee's skull?
The jut in its northern edge corresponds to wound number 11 in the back of his skull.
And in your expert opinion, were you able to determine when Mr. Lee died upon striking the boulder?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, I can rephrase it for you. Were you able to conclude in your expert opinion at what point Mr. Lee had died?
Yeah, yes, when he struck the boulder.
And in your expert opinion, you had previously testified that Mr. Lee was sent off the platform. What made you conclude that?
Because the boulder was several feet away from the platform, so he had to have been sent off by some external force. Had he had merely fallen off of the platform, he would have landed much closer to the platform as opposed to where the boulder was several feet away.
And in your expert opinion, based on your conclusion that he was sent off of the platform, did you conclude an ultimate cause of death?
I did. That led me to conclude this was a homicide.
Dr. Swanson, referring you back to your anatomy diagram in Exhibit 14, did you observe any other wounds to the back of Mr. Lee's skull?
I did. There was another one labeled wound number 4.
And what was the nature of this wound labeled number 4?
It was an abrasion.
Was this wound also consistent with Mr. Lee's head striking the back of the boulder?
No, it was not.
And in your expert opinion, why was it not consistent with his striking the boulder?
If that was caused by him striking the boulder, it would have been much more severe. It was not as severe as it would have been.
And in your expert opinion, were you able to determine the point at which Mr. Lee sustained this abrasion?
Anti-mortem, so would have been before he was sent off the platform.
And based on your determination that this second wound occurred before Mr. Lee had died, what were you able to conclude?
That led me to conclude this was a homicide.
Were there other wounds on Mr. Lee's body in your examination?
Yes, there were. To the front of Mr. Lee's body, there were several wounds from Tiger's claws as well as bites.
Was there a difference between these wounds to the front of the victim and the abrasion to the back of Mr. Lee's skull?
Yes, there was a difference in bleeding. So wound number 4 had to have occurred ante-mortem, and the wounds to the front of Mr. Lee's body occurred post-mortem after the blow to the...
And Dr. Swanson, did you look into Devin Lee's medical history?
I did, yes.
And what did you find?
I found that he was prescribed blood thinners.
Did you find the presence of any blood thinners in his system?
No, I did not find any blood thinners or any drugs.
Did you do a further toxicology report of Mr. Lee?
I did, and he had a BAC of 0.21.
Did you consider the possibility that Mr. Lee had died due to this high BAC?
Yes, of course I considered it, but there were several other more compelling factors, considering the boulder was several feet away from the platform. So if he had merely fallen, he wouldn't have reached that far, as well as the wound number 11 was so severe that it showed, that alluded to some external force setting him off.
And in the over 75 autopsies that you've performed in your career, do you typically consider multiple causes of death?
Yes, of course. I have to consider all causes of death, those being natural, environmental, accidental, and homicide.
And did you consider those possible causes in this case?
Yes, of course.
And why did you not determine that any of those causes of death had resulted in Mr. Lee's death?
The several compelling factors led to it to concluding that this was a homicide. Like I said, the boulder was several feet away from the platform, so that there must have been some external force sending him off of the platform. If he had merely fallen, he would have landed closer to the platform. And wound number 11 was so severe that that alludes to some external force.
And did you test for any physical evidence that would link Charlie Baker to the scene of the Tiger Enclosure?
No, I did not.
And why did you not test for that?
Because as we were conducting our investigation, Charlie Baker threw himself over the body of the victim. So if I were to test for his DNA, it's likely that it would have been on his body anyway.
Thank you, Dr. Swanson. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, very good. Any cross-examination?
Yes. Dr. Swanson, he testifies that Devin Lee was diagnosed with primary hypertension, correct?
Correct.
And was prescribed Toprol Xol.
Yes.
And there are some side effects associated with Toprol Xol.
There are.
And some of those side effects are particularly triggered with the consumption of alcohol, aren't they?
They are.
And one of those side effects that is triggered with the consumption of alcohol is dizziness, isn't it?
That is correct.
So a person who has been taking Toprol Xol and consuming alcohol could have trouble with their balance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And even absent Toprol Xol, a person who consumes alcohol could have trouble with their balance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did the toxicology report say that Devin had been drinking? Did you find that?
Yes. He had.
And what was the PAC?
0.21.
0.21. Dr. Swanson, are you aware that the legal limit for intoxication is 0.08?
I am aware.
So you're aware that Devin Lee had almost triple times the legal intoxication level of alcohol in his body?
Yes.
Did you, at any point in your report, assess the metabolic effect of Toprol Xol in the body and how long it stays in the bloodstream? Did you address that in your report?
I do not recall.
Okay. Now, is there any point in the report where you specifically say and conclude that Devin Lee had not taken Toprol Xol on March 7, 2010?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. Is there any point in your report in which you specifically conclude that Devin Lee has not taken Toprol Xol on March 7, 2010?
No, I did not, but it was.
Okay. So, moving on, you mentioned that Devin Lee's had the impact that it had suggested that he came into contact with the boulder at a high velocity. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, could he have reached that high velocity by leaping off of the ledge?
Objection, Your Honor. This is asking the expert to testify to a matter of physics, and the medical examiner is an expert in forensic pathology. He cannot testify to velocities.
Well, I think he's already given some testimony about his opinion as the person being thrown off or pushed off the ledge. So I think that's appropriate cross-examination.
Could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. Would Devin Lee have reached high velocity if he had jumped off the ledge?
I do not believe so.
You don't believe so, not with a running start.
With a running start, he had a BAC triple the legal
But
limit.
if he had a running start, could he have reached a high velocity?
Sure, he could.
Okay. Thank you. You've done 75 autopsies roughly in your career, is that correct?
Correct.
So how many autopsies have you done on people who were mauled by tigers?
I believe this is the first.
Okay. How many autopsies have you done on people who fell off of a high ledge and hit their head on a rock?
Could you repeat the question?
How many
Objection, Your Honor. This is asking a question that's outside the scope of the facts of this problem.
Well, it's not clear to me that that's the case, but I think you made your point. Can you move along?
Dr. Swanson, you created an autopsy report as you discussed after your examination. Your Honor, I'd like to mark the report, which has not been marked for identification as Exhibit 17.
You may.
And now showing closing counsel with a mark as Exhibit 17. If I may approach the witness.
You may.
Marks as Exhibit 17. Dr. Swanson, do you recognize this house?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
This is my medical report.
Okay. And has it been materially altered in any way since you created it or since you last seen it?
No.
And we now love to enter with as just been marked as Exhibit 17.
All right, any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, that's admitted.
Dr. Swanson, would you be able to point me to the line in your report that says that Charlie Baker pushed his husband off of the ledge?
That line is not.
Could you point me to the line in the report that says that anyone pushed Charlie or Devin Lee off of the ledge?
There is no specific wording that somebody was pushed.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned you collected several pieces of evidence, the boulder, I believe, the beer can. Did you collect any murder weapons at the scene?
Murder weapons?
You know, a gun, a knife, anything that you determined to be a murder weapon?
No, I did not.
You know. Okay, thank you. I may approach the witness.
You may.
Thank you.
Counsel, were you introducing that?
What's that?
No.
Dr. Swanson, was Devin Lee's injury, the blunt force trauma to the back of the head, was that consistent with an accidental cause of death?
No, it was.
It was not. So, on the final page of your report, did you not write the injuries are consistent with both accidental and homicide reasons for death?
Yes, I was being thorough in my report, and I had to consider all possible methods.
So, was it true what you wrote?
Yes. Oh,
So the injuries were consistent with an accidental cause of death?
could you repeat the question?
So the injuries then were consistent with an accidental cause of death as you wrote in your report?
I had ruled that out. Possibility. I concluded in the final sentence, around the final sentence, I believe, in my report that it was.
I'm sorry, you're testifying that what you wrote is not true.
I had written that, but
You did write that. Okay.
yes.
Thank you. And also, in your expert opinion, is it possible that Devin Lee's head injury was caused by a fall because of his communication?
No, that is not possible.
Okay. So is it also incorrect when you stated at the end of your report, although it is possible that the head injury was sustained due to a fall caused by the subject's high blood alcohol?
Can I rephrase? It is not probable. Anything is possible.
What I asked is it possible?
Yes, it is possible.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Swanson, did you find any blood thinners in Devin Lee's system?
No, I did not.
And did you write about multiple possible causes of death, including environmental and natural reasons in your report?
I did, yes.
And in your expert opinion, if the victim had run and jumped off of the platform, would he have hit his head back on the back of the skull?
No, he would not have.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, any recross?
No.
All right. That marks the end of your testimony, Doctor. You may step down. And counsel, just for clarity, I want you to collect the exhibits that
Yes.
in front of the jury. All right, does the government have any further witnesses they wish to call at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. The people called Joe Eagle to the stand.
All right, very good. Mr. Eagle, you can step up and be sworn.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth of what you're about to say?
I do.
Good evening, Mr. Eagle. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Thank you for being here today. Can you please just state your name for the record?
My name's Joe Eagle.
And where do you live?
I live 66 Swamp Street, Pawnee, New Scotland.
Thank you. What's your occupation, Mr. Eagle?
I'm the owner of Tiger Town.
What is Tiger Town?
It's this exotic show where you get to see tigers do new tricks and people get to interact with animals. It's a great experience.
And how long have you been the owner of Tiger Town?
22 years.
Did you know someone by the name of Devin Lee?
I did.
And how did you know Devin Lee?
Oh, we go way back. We worked at Sully's Safari together. He was a veterinarian.
How long ago did you work at Sully's Safari with Devin?
22 years ago.
And what was Devin's nature like when you worked with him at Sully's Safari with the animals?
Oh, he was very strict. He was very by the book, do everything by the book, and the animals are not your friends at the end of the day.
And what was the nature of your relationship like with Devin Lee for the last 22 years?
We were friendly. We could say we were friends.
Did you and Devin ever hang out together?
Yeah, sometimes we'd have a drink at the Cat's Meow.
And what is the Cat's Meow?
It's a bar.
Did you know who Mr. Lee was married to?
Yes, he was married to Charlie Baker.
And do you see Charlie Baker in the courtroom today?
I do. He's right there.
Can you please identify an article of Charlie Baker's clothing?
A black mask. And a gray shirt.
Your Honor, let the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant, Charlie Baker.
All right, the record also reflects.
Thank you. When you and Devin went to the Cat's Meow together, did you ever talk about things?
Sure, we did. We talked about business, his business, my business, personal stuff.
And when you weren't at the Cat's Meow, did you and Mr. Lee ever communicate via text message?
Sometimes we would.
Let the record reflect, I am showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 4 for identification purposes. May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Eagle, do you recognize what I just handed to you?
Sure, it's text messages between me and Devin.
And just to clarify, how do you recognize them?
Because I sent them.
Can you read the date for me at the top, please?
February.
Oh, I withdraw that, Your Honor. I would move to admit Exhibit 4 into evidence at this time.
All right, any objection to Exhibit 4?
Yes, Your Honor, we would object to the text messages as hearsay.
Sure, the right exhibit. This is the one dated March 7th, 2020.
It's Exhibit 1 of 2 and 2 of 2 or Exhibit 4. Sorry, it's both of them for Exhibit 4.
All right, I'll allow the exhibit.
Can you please read the date for me at the top?
February 17th, 2020.
And these texts indicate that Mr. Lee said to you, "Good seeing you too, Joe. Cheers to new beginnings." In your relationship with Devin Lee, did you understand what new beginnings meant?
I did.
And what did that mean to you when Devin would say that to you?
I think he was going to leave Charlie Baker and start a new life.
And then when you say to Mr. Lee, maybe we can start a new park with all that money, what did you mean by that?
Well, he was going to take all of his stuff with him. He's the big money guy down at the rescue, and he was going to take it all.
Did you and Devin ever discuss starting businesses together?
Besides from this, not really.
when you went to the bar, did you ever see Devin Lee there with anybody else?
Sure, I did.
Who did you see him there with?
Some hairdresser named Lola.
When was the first time that you recall, if you do recall, seeing Devin and Lola together at the Cat's Meow?
Late December 2019.
And do you know what the nature of Lola and Devin's relationship was?
They were having an affair.
How did you know that?
He told me.
And how did Devin seem when he was at the bar with?
We would object to Mrs. last statement. He told her he was having an affair, as he would say.
All right, your response?
It would be the state of mind of the declarant at the time.
I will grant the objection, so I'll strike that portion of the answer.
So when you saw Devin and Lola together at the bar, as you just stated, how did they seem together?
Oh, they really liked each other. They're having a good time.
And did you often see Devin and Lola together at the bar?
Yes.
And you also stated that you and Devin discussed business matters. Were you aware of the animals that were at Newport Rescue?
I was definitely aware of the animals at Newport Rescue.
And did you know about any of the tigers at Newport Rescue?
There was one tiger named Katara that Devin was specifically not happy about. Charlie bought him without his permission.
Do you know when Charlie bought Katara?
Yeah, late 2019.
And when you and Devin Lee would discuss the things about his business, did you ever discuss who would do taking care of Katara and feeding Katara?
Not so much, no.
Was it your understanding that Devin was the one that took care of Katara?
No, it was not.
Just to clarify, Devin was not the one that took care of Katara?
He's the veterinarian, so perhaps he had some interaction.
Do you recall the events of March 7th, 2020?
I do.
And what happened on that day at Newport Rescue specifically?
Charlie Baker was having a big old ego fest.
Was there anything going on specifically at Newport Rescue?
They were just having like a big convention of all sorts of people coming down, something to make a lot of money.
And did you see Devin Lee on March 7th, 2020?
Oh, I saw him.
Where did you see him?
I saw him at the Cat's Meow.
Do you recall what time you saw him there at?
Yeah, I saw him at around 5 o'clock, so I'm strolling.
And did you talk to Devin when he came into the bar?
No, I didn't talk to him till about 7.
When you went over to Devin, how did he seem?
He seemed like he was in a rush to get out of there.
And did you notice if Devin was drinking?
No, it's a bar. Everyone's drinking, so.
Did you and Devin have a conversation before he left the bar that night?
Yes, a quick conversation.
And did Devin mention to you when he left the bar that night what he was going home to do?
He was going to spill the beans. He's going to tell Charlie that he's having an affair and that he wants to leave her.
Do you recall what time Devin left the bar at?
Probably about 7:45.
And do you know how he got home?
Yeah, I called him an Uber.
Let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 7 for identification purposes. May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Mr. Eagle, do you recognize what I've just handed to you?
Yes, it's an Uber receipt.
And how do you recognize that Uber receipt?
Well, it's a receipt I paid for. I see my card is charged.
And looking at this time, Your Honor, I would like to move to admit Exhibit 7 into evidence.
All right, very good. Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, we would object. Receipts are inadmissible hearsay when used to prove that something was purchased.
Response?
We're not proving that the Uber was purchased. The purpose of this examination, which I was going to get to, is just the time frame.
Is the time?
The time frame.
Okay, all right. I'll allow it then.
Thank you. Looking at this Uber receipt towards the bottom on the second time, Mr. Eagle, can you read the address that's next to that for me?
Which one? There are 2 addresses.
The second one, the last one.
3 Woodland Drive, Pawnee, New
Do
Scotland.
you recognize that address?
I do.
What do you recognize it as?
That's the rescue. Charlie Baker's place of business.
And is that also where Devin Lee lived?
That is.
Can you please read for me the 2 time frames? So the first time, please.
7:47, and the second one is 7:59.
So 7:59 p.m. is when Devin Lee arrived home.
That's correct.
Your Honor, may I publish to the jury?
Yes, you may.
Did you communicate with Mr. Lee after he left the bar on March 7th, 2020?
Well, I sent him a text message.
And did Devin Lee ever respond to you?
No, he didn't.
Do you still have Exhibit 4 in front of you?
Yes, I do.
So at 8:11 p.m. on March 7th, 2020, looking at the second part of Exhibit 4, you texted Devin saying, "Get home all right, bud," right? The first text message on the second page?
Yep.
And then you texted him again at 8:12 p.m. So after that, did Devin ever answer you? On March 7th, 2020?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Did Devin ever respond to you again on March 7th, 2020 after you texted him?
No, he never responded back.
And based on the nature of your friendship, was that unusual?
Yeah, that was really unusual. Normally he would send a text back or give some sort of something.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, any cross-examination? You may proceed.
Mr. Eagle, you saw Devin at this bar pretty regularly, right?
I would say so.
And on the day in question, Devin had already been drinking for a little while before you began to talk to him, right?
Objection, Your Honor. That's outside the knowledge of the witness.
Remember, he was at the bar with this witness. He's testified to when he came in.
I'll allow the answer, assuming that there's a factual basis in the record for it.
Can you repeat the question?
Had you seen Devin drinking before you began talking to him?
In general or a specific time or?
On that day, March 7th.
No, I mean, not till I started talking to him. I mean, it's a bar, so, you know, lots of stuff is going on.
But when you started talking to him, you guys drank together.
When we talk, yeah, we drink.
And did he seem pretty intoxicated by the end of it?
He seemed more so in a rush. That was the main. It's hard to say. He just seemed like he was in a rush to get out of there.
And you paid for his drinks, didn't you?
I did.
And you paid for 6 shots and whiskey shot.
I did.
So those were his drinks they gave you.
Well, he's a nice guy. You know, maybe he got everyone else a drink.
As far as you know, those were his drinks that you were paying. You weren't paying for somebody else's drinks.
As far as I know, those were the drinks on the receipt.
And so, what's that much alcohol? Is it fair to say he was drunk?
I'm not sure with that much alcohol because I don't know if he drank all of it.
Well, you didn't pay for those drinks because he forgot himself, you know?
I did.
And you also paid that Uber because you didn't think he was safe to drive home, you know?
Just as a principle, I think if you go to the bar, you should probably take a Uber home.
But specifically, did you think he was too drunk to drive that day?
I can't really say. I just, he was in such a rush, and then I was just like, go.
Whoever you are, I'm sure the opposing counsel should report. As far as you like evidence, and heading to the witness.
Okay.
Now, could you read the message you sent at 8:12?
You look like you had a few too many.
Now, by a few too many, can I take that to mean if you drank too much that evening?
You could.
Good. Well, you were pretty intoxicated yourself, weren't you?
Objection, Your Honor. What's the relevance of that question?
Well, I mean, it's PJ witness.
Yeah, that's appropriate cross-examination.
I had the usual amount.
And is that a fair amount of alcohol?
It's like enough for a buzz.
But you were at the bar even before Devin, right?
True.
And that you specifically went there for a beer, right?
For a beer, yeah.
And you stayed there until 11 o'clock that night, didn't you?
I did.
Well, Devin had been talking about shooting his wife for some time now, hadn't he?
I'm sorry.
Have you been talking about leaving his wife for some time now?
Yes.
Have you never acted on it until that night?
Yes.
And he didn't give us a fair secret from Charlie, right?
As far as I know.
Moving on. Is that true that you and Charlie have had a bad relationship for years?
It's been not the best.
In fact, you guys have disagreements ever since you guys worked together at some, didn't you?
Originally I was fine with her. She disliked me.
But you thought she was jealous. You were jealous of him, didn't you?
I think she is. Yes.
And you thought he was always trying to sabotage, right?
Yes.
And in fact, you thought Charlie hated you, right?
I would say she greatly disliked me. Yeah.
And you guys have been business competitors ever since you opened up your zoo shortly after you opened up as a restaurant.
I don't know if you would call us business competitors. We have two different philosophies, and I'm more of a show. She's more of a zoo.
Both of your businesses dealt with exotic animals like tigers, correct?
Correct.
And part of your reasoning with opening Tiger Town was because of Charlie, wasn't it?
No, I wanted to throw up my own shingle and start making money for myself.
So did you specifically tell the police that Charlie was part of that reason?
No, I wanted mainly to start my own business. I've been working for Sully for so long, and I was making money that I wasn't seeing.
So it is your testimony that you did not tell the police that Charlie was part of the reason why.
So slightly.
But part of the reason for it.
Minorly, yes.
Now, as two companies that deal with exotic animals, you compete for the same customers?
In a way, yeah. If some customer wants to see a tiger, those are two places to go.
It's a business man who profit if they choose to overturn.
That's correct.
In fact, we had at least a few run-ins with the law of harassing Charlie in this business, haven't we?
Had a few run-ins, yeah.
Now, one instance, November 2017, you were on Charlie's property near the scene, didn't you?
As in, I was trying to go there to ask Charlie to stop spreading rumors about me.
You did go on the property.
I did.
Is it true that police were called when you were arrested for harassing Charlie?
I was, but that was it. And we got past that. It's all water under the bridge.
I'm sure President Johnson said 5 for identification.
Okay.
Is that 15? Okay.
Yes, 15, you're right, sorry. Yeah, what's the witness, sorry?
Let me just get up. Okay.
Is it 15 for identification?
Okay.
That was the copy of the arrest warrant that was made in 2017?
Yes.
And is that, this report contain the officer's account for having that day?
Yes,
Is that your signature on the bottom?
that is.
And to your knowledge, is that the officer up there not in a position to have to do it?
Let me see. Yes, but this was all blown out of proportion. I was just going to ask her. That's a yes.
That was a 15-minute evidence.
I would object to that, Your Honor. Under 608B, the purpose really hasn't been identified yet for what this evidence is being offered for.
I'm continuing to show Lewis bias against my client.
Understood. I'll accept the exhibit.
I came onto the business to ask nicely for him to stop, spreading lies and rumors about me. It was taking away my customers.
But weren't there standing attendees at Charlie to be after you asked to leave?
I'm just a loud person.
See, and weren't you yelling at it for stealing your customers? Weren't you yelling at it for stealing your customers?
Yes.
In fact, you told the police that you were there because you were losing business, didn't you?
Because of the lies Charlie was telling.
See, and you didn't leave until you were handcuffed and arrested, right?
That's correct.
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, you know that since July 2018, you had to pay a fine for harassing Charlie, didn't you?
I did.
Now, you're familiar with the Newport base of the account, right?
I am.
And you have an account of your own, right?
I do.
And you post on that page, right?
I do.
Now, 2018, you hacked Charlie's accounts for Newport arrested inmates.
I did.
Not going to actually go down to it's a 5 for identification. Okay, what's the witness, right?
Yes, you may.
Okay, now she can release as a 5 identification. And ask you to accept.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, do you recognize this?
I do recognize it.
This is a screenshot of post you made when you happened to be a arrest.
It is.
This is a very accurate representation. Yes, percent.
Yes.
When you look at it in full evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, I would object to that also under 608, the purpose of it.
All right, again, the purpose is?
Not over there again, do this show bias.
All right, I'll accept the exhibit and allow it to be entered.
Can you do this post here?
Charlie Baker is a lying fraud who abuses their cats. Come to Tiger Town instead at 66 Swamp Street, Pawnee, New Scotland for the best experience in town.
And when you said this message, you didn't have any evidence that Charlie was abusing his cats, right?
No.
So when you said this pretending it was Charlie from the cat rescue, you were trying to hurt Charlie in his business, right?
I was just wanted to make a post.
You told the police that you telling people what they needed to hear.
I was.
And you do this to harm his business, they would come to yours instead of his, right?
Well, I was telling the people what they needed to hear.
And you want them to come to your business instead of his, right?
I mean, in general, yes.
Okay. Kristen, you mentioned your texts to Devin earlier today. You sent them the text on February 17th.
Yes.
First witness, John?
Yes, you may.
Now, and this the first page of exhibit 4. Now, is this a screenshot, the text that you and Devin?
That is.
And you was sent after you got some drinks.
Yes.
Now, can you read the message sent at 10:44?
Heck yeah. About time you left Charlie in the dust.
And I left Charlie in the dust. You said that because of your dislike for Charlie.
I said that because he was about to leave Charlie.
But liking the dust would tend to You do it for the thing. You dislike this person. What can I say?
It's just an expression. It's time to go. Pack things up. Maybe we can start a new park with all that money. Oh, well, he planned on taking all of his money and leaving, so it was just a suggestion. I am a businessman. True.
But you didn't actually commit yourself that day.
Sorry?
You actually commit yourself to the rest of the responsibility.
No.
Now, we're trying to after Charlie was sole-owner, they have arrested, wasn't it?
Yes.
Next time we went to jail, the rescue shut down. That would be the entire time the owners were back, right?
Correct.
Next time we went to rescue, what are your main rivals in town, right?
Yeah, we were the only two places with exotic animals.
And your main purpose when we have Tiger Town was to make money, right?
Oh yeah.
And so Charlie went to prison. I was making a lot of money, wasn't it?
It would definitely help our business out, my business out.
No more questions, Your Honor.
All right, very good. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Eagle, how long have you been the owner of Tiger Town for?
22 years.
And do you know, if you do know, how long Jaclyn Rescue has been open for?
Around the same amount of time.
And those two instances that opposing counsel just mentioned about the Facebook post and the trespassing report, did you remain friends with Devin Lee after those things occurred?
Well, yeah, because Devin understands and Charlie blows everything out of the water. You know, it wasn't that big of a deal.
And for the Facebook post specifically, did you ever apologize for writing that?
I did apologize and we all got over it. I was very sincere about it.
And did you ever admit to writing that?
I did. I told the truth. I wrote it.
Did Tiger Town have other animals besides tigers?
Oh, sure. We had pumas, lions, all sorts of stuff.
And in the last 22 years, did you have any issues with your business?
Nope, not one.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, any recross?
No more questions, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Eagle, that marks the end of your testimony. You can stand down now. Does the government have any additional witnesses I'd like to call at this time?
The people rest at this time, Your Honor.
People rest. Our procedure to take a break at this point, or do we proceed on? How are we doing? Anyone need a break? Let me take a 5-minute break and then we'll reconvene, right?
That scene was so comfortable. I know, it was so like super sugar too for some reason.
I got so confused at this because it was the same thing, and I was like,
sorry. You did really good.
Thanks.
You did really good.
Knocked out the blood.
You?
We think you guys are doing right now.
I was like, is that it? Is that the whole identification? No, you did great though. Really good job, both of you.
Do you have another water? Okay, thank you.
I didn't know it was shared. Yeah.
I just saw your mom.
Yeah.
Good thing you did yours. So how's it going? Anybody
So I'm like,
Yeah, the only part I was thinking of people in the community. Thank you. And Kevin Legrand does a lot of plaintiffs. So first name Kevin. Yep. And then Louis Brand is Luibrand. And Kevin's a brilliant guy. He's contemporary mind. He might be a little bit older. He's probably the most successful civil rights attorney. I mean, the other attorneys does all the work. The problem with Bob is you never know what you get up halfway through. He can just talk about all sorts of other things. You know, yeah. Good luck. Good. I just finally sent that bottle of That cost me like No, I think it's great, you know, the option of getting people in. It's really, really works well. Especially like you say, you want to get as many different viewpoints. So, great, thanks.
No, she was sitting up there, but I don't know where she went.
All right, guys, we're gonna get started with
All right, the record can reflect that we're back in court. The jury is seated. The defendant is present. The government, the people have rested their case. So does the defense wish to call any witnesses at this point in time?
Your Honor, before we do, we'd like to make a motion.
All right, go ahead.
The defense moves to dismiss the charges against that client on the basis the prosecution has failed to meet the burden, either show my client was involved in any murder or that any such crime was premeditated as required by New Scotland law.
All right, and the position of the people.
Yes, Your Honor, we oppose the motion to dismiss on the grounds that the prosecution has proved every single element of the crime of first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt through the testimony of the witnesses and the evidence presented here today.
All right, I'm going to reserve on your motion. And you can proceed.
At this time, the defense calls Aidan Cooper to stand.
Okay. Mr. Cooper, you can come up and sit and be sworn. Just sit and be sworn, yep.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth of what you're about to say?
I do.
Before we begin, I'd just like to ask you to try to keep the microphone close to your mouth and speak clearly into it. Can you say your name for the record?
Aidan Cooper.
How old are you, Mr. Cooper?
25.
And what is your occupation?
I work at Newport Rescue.
And what does that entail?
So I'm kind of the jack of all trades. I do a lot of the bookkeeping. I feed the cats, I lock the cages. I do some of the public outreach stuff. Basically anything you can think of, I do.
And how long have you been working there?
7 years.
And who are Devin and Charlie to you?
They're my bosses and my mentors.
Did you know Devin well?
Oh yeah, Devin taught me everything I know.
And based on your observations, what was Devin's relationship with the animals?
Devin was always very cautious with the animals. Well, usually cautious anyways.
Let's see, you said one notice is one would be not.
When, you know, he was cautious when he's sober, let's put it that way.
See, did he become cautious when he wasn't sober?
Unfortunately, yes.
Can you tell me about that?
So there were a couple times. The most standout one was about 2 years ago. You know, I was getting ready to leave after my shift, about 9 or 10 p.m. And I came across Devin on the ground, just about passed out drunk, with his hands in the cages in one of the exhibits.
And did you tell anybody about that incident?
Yeah, I had to tell Charlie. I had to get him home somehow.
And what was his reaction?
Charlie seemed, they were sad, almost disappointed, but they almost didn't seem surprised by it.
And how long had this drinking been going on?
First time I'd seen it was 2 years ago. I'd imagine sometime.
It's been going on. It has been going on since then?
Oh yeah, if anything, it's only gotten worse.
Did Devin ever drink while he was working?
Yeah, it would appear so. He would come in reeking of alcohol. He came in on numerous occasions like that.
And how did the alcohol affect Devin's work at all?
He threw normally sober Devin, super cautious, harped on the rules and all that. Would always be lecturing us about safety. Drunk Devin seemed to throw caution to the wind. I'd find him, like I said, he had his hands in the cages once. We were instructed never to do that unless we were feeding the cats.
But do you know what started the drinking?
Not exactly. From what I understand, I think it happened sometime after his parents passed away.
No. Did you know Charlie well?
Oh yeah, Charlie was my boss. They're the ones that hired me.
You told me how you first met Charlie?
I was 18 years old, had big dreams of going away to a big city, going to college. But unfortunately, my mother, she came down with a diagnosis of cancer. Medical bills were piling up and I needed some way to pay the bills and kind of put bread on the table. Charlie was generous enough to take a chance on a young 18-year-old kid and gave me a job. At the time I was only, I started off cleaning cages and stuff, but then, the longer I was there, the more Charlie gave me more responsibilities. About 5 years ago, I had my first live cat exhibit. I really owe a ton to Charlie, honestly. They've really helped me, kind of keep a foot up and just help me keep on keeping on.
Have you ever witnessed him doing anything violent?
Absolutely not. Charlie was always a lover.
Based on your observations, how would you describe Devin and Charlie's marriage?
It had the rough patches like any other marriage would, but, you could tell Charlie still loved Devin very much.
And what about Devin's feelings, if you had any observations?
It's been hard to say, especially with Devin's drinking lately. It's really hard to tell what he thought.
Well, do you know if they had any secrets from each other?
Objection, Your Honor. That calls for the witness to speculate about the relationship between husband and wife, which he was not a part.
Sustained.
Well, to your knowledge, did Charlie know Joey?
Oh, Charlie knew Joe Eagle, all right.
And based on your observations, what was their relationship like?
They had one of the most adversarial relationships I've ever seen between two human beings.
Moving on, I'd like to talk to you about the event of March 7th. What was going on at the animal rescue that day?
So that was the day of our big conservation convention. Basically, it was this event that NCR was putting on to try to put themselves on the map. It was supposed to give us a big name outside of the state and kind of, exemplify what we were doing in the big cat world, and while at the same time raising a lot of money for charity for conservation for big cats in the wild.
So how important was this event?
This event was supposed to be huge. It was supposed to be a huge launching event for New Cat Wound Rescue. It was supposed to, kind of give us recognition throughout the United States and throughout the world.
And how much preparation went into it?
So much. Being that, I'm kind of the jack of all trades for New Cat Wound Rescue, I had a huge role in planning the event. I had access to both Charlie's email and New Cat Wound Rescue's business accounts. Charlie had me emailing well over 24 people, zoologists, conservationists, veterinarians, all sorts of people in the trade. We really wanted to get our name out there and show all the good work that we were doing.
Now, on the day of the event, where's Devin?
For a little bit of time, he was there.
What, if anything, was he doing while he was there?
I'd reckon a whole bunch of nothing. He was reeking of alcohol again, wasn't really helping out. Remember, I had to pick up the slack for him.
And for longer
I only recall him being there for the morning, till little after noon. After that, he disappeared. Honestly, I don't recall him ever coming back during the time between that and when I left.
And what made you think was missing while he was gone?
Devin was supposed to give the closing remarks at this event. It was supposed to be a big speech to all the guests that had arrived and all the, the tourists and like customers that we had. I had to. Charlie asked me to step up and take up the role. Well, usually I hate public speaking, but it actually went over really well.
And what happened after the event?
Well, I went to go make the evening rounds, feed the cats and lock up the cages. And Charlie, bless his heart, they were nice enough to give me the day off or give me the rest of the afternoon off, kind of as a reward for all the hard work I'd put in.
Now, moving on, how well do you know the animals?
Oh, I know it like the back of my hand.
Yes, you may.
Yes, sir. It's the map of Newport Rescue. We have this actually posted right up at the main entrance for the guests when they come around.
What makes you familiar with this?
It's the map that we use all the time. And honestly, I'm at Newport Rescue every day. I walk by it every time I come in.
And then you specifically familiar with the layout on March 8th?
Yes, sir.
Does it really happen to get the layout of the rescue?
Yes, sir.
But this time, like, there one in evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, that's admitted.
But may I publish copy of this as a
You may.
So basically this map, it shows all of the different exhibits, our amphitheater, Charlie and Devin's home, the office, and where the guest park, all of that stuff.
Could you tell me where the office is located on this map?
Yes, sir. It's right up here towards the top middle. You'll see there's a little triangle shaped sort of thing. That's the office right there.
And is the Katara's enclosure on this map?
Yes, sir.
Can you show them where that is?
Yep. So if you look at the office, right to the right of that is Katara's enclosure.
So how close are these two areas?
Oh, they're within spitting distance of each other.
And what's the first thing somebody might see when exiting the office?
Well, the first thing you're going to see is a clear view of Katara's enclosure.
And how easy or difficult would it be for somebody to get from the office to the exhibit?
Oh, it's super easy. It's barely even a short walk.
Moving on, Mr. Cooper, can you tell us what you did the morning after the convention?
Well, it's a difficult topic. I came in at 5:50, as I always do for my 6 a.m. shift. Started prepping food for the cats, started going around the feeding them. And I heard this whimpering coming from Katara's enclosure. I wasn't really sure what to make of it or anything.
And what did you see?
I went over to Katara's enclosure just as I would, Peter. And I went in there and I couldn't believe what I saw. Katara was covered in blood, and in there was Devin, or at least what was left of Devin, torn up by the cat and partially eaten too.
There, at this time, we would like to bring a demonstrative exhibit. It's essentially a black copy of exhibit 10 that's already been in evidence.
All right.
There you go.
Exhibit 11.
So yes.
Mr. Cooper, which cage is this?
That would appear to be Katara's enclosure.
So this is the same one that you found Devin?
Yes, sir.
And has been done before?
Yes, sir. Every day that I work.
So you're familiar with this cage?
Yes, sir.
Now, looking at this photo, can you describe the cage here?
So Katara's enclosure is a little bit different from all the rest of the enclosures. Hers is an aerial enclosure. So basically what you have there is you have an aerial display. So what you can do is there's a handicap access ramp that was installed so that, you know, anybody, whether they're elderly, disabled, young children, they can go up there to the viewing platform and you get this spectacular bird's eye view of the enclosure.
And how large is this enclosure compared to the others?
This is probably one of the larger enclosures at Newport Rescue.
And look at this diagram. Do you see where one would go to the guitar?
Yes, sir. So if you go up to the viewing platform at the very top there, you can see where Katara is sitting there. Towards one side of there, there's a door with a pin key in there, and you put the pin into the pin pad and you go out onto that ledge.
And could you tell me more about this pin pad?
Yeah, it was the standard pin pad. All the enclosures at Newport Rescue had the same pin pad. They actually all have the same code on them. It's a pretty short code. It's pretty easy to remember. Every single employee knows it.
And when you're on this ledge, how much room does it extend?
Oh gosh, not a lot. A couple feet, if even that.
And what kind of view do you have when you're standing on that ledge?
So when you're standing on that ledge, you pretty much have a clear aerial view of the entire enclosure except for what's directly underneath the viewing platform.
So, how do you discover that in the body? Can you tell us what you did?
It's all a bit of a blur, honestly. I remember screaming like a banshee, louder than I ever had before. And I called 911. That I know for sure.
And what's the children around?
I don't recall them being around at the time, no.
And did the co-pilot when Joe did arrive?
Yes, sir. They arrived later on.
And what was Joe's reaction to seeing this?
They seemed mortified by the scene.
Any questions from the witness, Your Honor?
Okay, very good. All right, any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Cooper. So you testified to a night where you had found Devin drunk with only his hands in an enclosure, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that event occurred 2 years ago, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was the most drunk you have ever seen Devin, correct?
No, ma'am. It seemed like his drinking's only gotten worse since then.
Did you give a sworn affidavit, Mr. Cooper?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you give that affidavit in August of 2020? 2021, excuse me.
I don't remember exactly.
Did you give an affidavit after Devin Lee's death occurred?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you sign the affidavit to affirm the truthfulness of everything that you had written in this affidavit?
I believe so.
At this time, Your Honor, I move for the affidavit to be marked as Exhibit 18.
All right, so marked.
And did you say in this sworn affidavit, Mr. Cooper, in regards to this event, I never saw Devin in such a bad state as I did that night, correct?
Up till that point, yes. I'd never seen him up until that point, that drunk.
Since that night, correct, in your statement?
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't carry a breathalyzer on me, but he's been intoxicated since that night on plenty of occasions.
And you swore to the truthfulness of your statement, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And Devin was normally very strict with the rules when it came to cats, correct?
When he was sober, yes.
And because Devin was so strict, one of his rules was not to go near Katara until she was fed, correct?
Well, somebody had to feed her, but yeah.
And that rule was because Katara had a dangerous temper, correct?
I mean, these aren't your grandma's tabbies, ma'am. They all kind of have a temper. They're wild animals.
And because Katara was so aggressive, you were the only employee who would feed her, correct?
As far as I know, I was the only one. When I was there, I was the only one that fed her.
Isn't it true that you were the only one who would interact with Katara?
When I was there, yes.
And Devin was afraid of Katara, correct?
This calls for speculation as to what Devin was and wasn't afraid of.
Well, the witness you can ask what knowledge they have on that issue. So I'll overrule the objection, allow the question to stand.
I can repeat the question for you. Was Devin afraid of Katara?
I would imagine so.
And Devin never wanted Katara at the rescue because she had an aggressive history, correct?
From what I understand, he wasn't fond of the cat.
And that was a big source of strife in the marriage between Mr. Baker and Devin, correct?
That I'm honestly unsure of.
And was Devin terrified of heights?
Sober Devin, sure. Again, drunk Devin was a different beast altogether.
And Katara's enclosure, that platform is 15 feet off the ground, correct?
15, 20 feet, somewhere around there. I'm not actually sure about the exact height, but I'd say around that height.
And you're responsible for the bookkeeping at Newport Rescue, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So you had access to the bank statements, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
At this time, let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 9. It has been stipulated already that this is a fair and accurate representation of New Cotton's bank statements. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Cooper, do you recognize what I've just handed to you?
It appears to be one of the bank statements for NCR.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of the bank statement?
I mean, I don't remember every single transaction that we do, so I'm not sure if it's 100%, but it looks, I don't have any reason to doubt it. I mean, it looks about right, I guess.
At this time, Your Honor, I brief for what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 9 to be admitted into evidence.
All right, any objection?
Yes, sir, and I'd object to this as hearsay. This is a statement by the bank out of court with the truth of the matter asserted.
There's a stipulation though in place that this is an accurate business record, is there not?
No, we've stipulated that exactly. We haven't stipulated that it's admissible. It is still hearsay. We still cannot, the attorney does not have the right to confront the maker of this record.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
This falls into the hearsay exception under 803 as a business record because this is kept regularly in the practice of Newport Rescue and the witness has direct knowledge because he is the bookkeeper of the business.
All right. Based on that, I will allow the evidence in.
This bank statement goes all the way up to March 5th, 2020, correct?
Yes, it looks like it, yes.
And that was just 2 days before Devin Lee died, correct?
Correct.
And the beginning balance on this bank statement is $79,212.62, correct?
Correct.
And the total number of withdrawals from this account is $69,000, correct?
I'm going to trust your numbers on that. Yeah, if that's what it is, yes.
And you noticed that Devin had made these withdrawals to a one out Lovelace, correct?
I mean, I sure wasn't the one that authorized those, but I presume so. I really don't know who authorized them, but you know, he had access to the purse, I suppose.
And in your sworn affidavit, did you say, I noticed Devin was giving away a lot of money to someone named Al Lovelace, correct?
I noticed it, yeah.
And you asked Devin about this, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And Devin wanted you to forget what you saw, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you never told Charlie, correct?
No, ma'am.
And Devin was the money behind New Catland Rescue, correct?
Yeah, Devin had a decent bit of cash. I'm not sure why, but I guess I don't know, he was just independently wealthy or something.
And Mr. Baker was only the face of New Catland Rescue, correct?
I mean, they worked as a team. So, I would say that Devin also had a role in promoting the business.
And in your sworn affidavit, did you say Charlie was the face behind it all and Devin was the purse?
Well, yes, those were their roles, but still, I mean, they're a married couple.
Thank you for your answer. I have another question for you.
All right.
I'd like to turn your attention to the morning of March 8th, 2020. I'm sorry if this is difficult. When you first found Devin's body in that tiger enclosure that morning, the first thing that you did was to call 911, correct?
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, I only assume that's natural.
And very shortly after you called 911, Mr. Baker appeared at Katara's enclosure, correct?
I don't know how much time elapsed, honestly. It was quite a blur.
And the entirety of New Catland Rescue is 10 acres, correct?
I believe so. Somewhere around there.
And I'd like to direct your attention to the evening before on March 7th. On that day, you testified that you left early, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you leave early because you received a text message from your boss, Mr. Cooper? Or, excuse me, Mr. Baker?
I believe so, yes.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as exhibit number 8 for identification purposes. It has already been stipulated that this is a fair and accurate representation of the screenshot of the text messages. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Cooper, do you recognize what I just handed to you?
Yes, ma'am.
What do you recognize it to be?
It looks like my text messages with Charlie.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of those text messages?
Yes, ma'am.
At this time, Your Honor, I move for what has been pre-marked as exhibit 8 to be moved into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, sir. Again, object to these messages as hearsay. They're made out of court to the truth of the matter asserted.
All right, response?
Yes, Your Honor, this would fall into a hearsay exception under 801D2. This is an admission by the party because the text messages are made by Mr. Baker, who is present in the courtroom today.
Your Honor, if I may respond?
You may.
Only 2 of these text messages are made by Mr. Baker. The other 4 are not.
And those 4 are made by whom?
They are made by the witness.
All right, and you have the ability to cross-examine them, right?
Yes.
All right, so with that, I'll allow it.
Thank you, Your Honor. Was the first text message that you received at 5:43 p.m. letting you go home early that night, Mr. Cooper?
Yes, ma'am.
And you testified previously that New Catland Rescue had just had the biggest event that it had ever had, correct?
Correct, that's right.
And because Mr. Baker let you go home early, he had to take over the rounds that you normally did, correct?
I would believe so. I don't know who else was present that night, but I believe that presumably that they did.
And that included feeding Katara, correct?
Correct.
And you found that unusual because Mr. Baker had never interacted with Katara personally ever before, correct?
I mean, I didn't, yeah, but also this was my first time getting a night off. I figured, if I'm not going to do it, who else is going to do it?
So you mentioned this was your first night off. Looking at the text message that you sent at 5:47 p.m., did you say in response to Charlie, so my boss let me out for the first time in 7 years. It's about time.
Well, that was supposed to go to my friend Caitlin. It wasn't necessarily to Charlie.
Did you send that text message?
By accident, yes.
So that was the first time that you had ever been let out early in 7 years, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you still had to come in before 6 a.m. the next day, correct?
Well, yes, that's the shift I've signed up for.
And Ms. Baker texted you hours later at 7:13 p.m., correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in her text message, she said, it's okay, Hayden, I'll need a loyal employee like you after tonight, correct?
That is indeed what it says.
Are you being a loyal employee by testifying for your boss here tonight?
I don't, I guess so. What?
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, a few questions. Mr. Cooper, you mentioned that as far as when you were there, you were the only one who tried the tower, right?
That's correct, sir.
Were you there the entire time?
No, sir.
So do you know who did or not drop the tower after you left the zoo?
No, sir.
Also mentioned the payments that were made in advance here, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the prosecution mentioned number 69 something thousand, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Now, could you read out the amount that were paid actually to all levels?
It says September 17th, 15,000. March 1st, 15,000.
Any others?
No, sir. Or yes, December 23rd, 15,000.
Now, just maybe you guys have that out. What is that correct?
45,000, I believe. I think.
And you mentioned the amount of acres for the entire rest, right?
Yes, sir.
Were the Tiger Enclosure and Charlie's home on the complete opposite sides of the rescue?
I wouldn't say they're on the opposite sides of the rescue. It's kind of intermediate.
So was there less than 10 acres in between?
Oh, yes.
Now, how did you like your job?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, it's how I put food on the table. Really helped me pay for my mother's medical bills.
Did you want to be let out of any other day?
No, sir. I needed the money pretty bad. You know, with the amount of, my mother had cancer, with the amount of medical bills that she had, you know, we were hurting for money. So I really needed to take those 12-hour shifts whenever I could get them. And I was really thankful for Charlie for giving me so many hours and being able to make that money.
In terms of you being here today, are you the one who found that advice?
Yes, sir.
And do you believe that's the reason you were here today?
I'd imagine so, sir.
One more question, Charlie.
Great. Any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Just one more question for you, Mr. Cooper. So if Mr. Baker goes to jail, then you'd lose your job, correct?
I don't know what would happen, honestly.
No further questions.
All right, very good. All right, Mr. Cooper, that marks the end of your testimony. You're free, feel free to step down. You can leave those with whatever counsel gave them to you. All right, does the defense have any other witnesses they wish to call?
Yes, Your Honor, the defense would like to call Charlie Baker to the stand.
All right, Mr. Baker, you can come on, step up and be sworn in.
Do you swear to tell the truth of what you're about to say?
I do.
Could you state and spell your name for the record, please?
Charlie Baker, Charley, Baker, Baker.
And please state your date of birth as well.
11/2/71.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Baker?
I'm the owner of New Catland Rescue.
And what do you do there as owner of New Catland Rescue?
So I kind of do a little bit of everything. I'm really just in charge of making sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible and making sure that our business is successful.
And what is New Catland Rescue?
New Catland Rescue is an animal sanctuary for big cats, tigers, lions, like that.
Now, Before we continue, I would just like to say that some of these questions may be difficult under the circumstances. Please take your time in answering them and answer them to the best.
I understand.
Are you married, Mr. Baker?
Yeah, I was.
To whom?
I was married to Devin Lee.
For how long?
25 years.
And where did Devin work?
So Devin was the co-owner with me at Newport Rescue.
And what were Devin's responsibilities there?
So he was really just in charge of, you know, keeping the books of the place, running the financials of the place. He also assisted in the upkeep with the cats.
Did you work on the finances as well?
No, not at all. That stuff confused me, so I just left it to him.
And how would you describe your relationship with Devin Lee?
Well, we loved each other. We really did. You know, we've been together for 25 years. We've had our ups and downs, of course, as any marriage does, but overall, it was a loving relationship.
Could you describe what you mean by downs?
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, Devin's parents passed away, and he developed quite a drinking problem. And since then, it's put a little bit of a strain on our relationship.
What do you mean by drinking problem?
Well, it just started out as, you know, he'd go to the bar every so often. He just started drinking more and more over the past 4 years. It really seemed like his drinking just kept going up and up and up.
What was Devin like when he was drinking?
So he really just didn't like to talk about anything. It was hard to see.
And how did you deal with this?
So I tried to talk things out with him, you know, ask him about, you know, his drinking problem, and every time I would, he just didn't really seem like he wanted to have that conversation.
Did Devin's drinking affect his work performance?
Yeah, so sober Devin and drunk Devin are two completely different people. Sober Devin is a hardworking individual, and drunk Devin kind of didn't seem to really care.
Was your husband ever unfaithful to you?
Yes. Found out you know, that he was having an affair with someone.
Did that change how you felt about him?
I mean, it hurt, it really did, but I still loved him. I really wanted to try and talk things out with him.
Did you ever confront him about that?
Yeah, I did. On the night before he passed, I tried to talk things out with him, and it didn't go too well. It didn't seem like he really wanted to talk.
Why did you try to confront him about that?
To try and resolve our problems. I wanted to talk things through and try and move past this.
Do you remember the day of March 7th, 2020?
I do.
Were you working that day?
I was.
Was there anything remarkable about that day of work?
So the 7th was our Cool Cats and Kittens Festival. It was a big donor festival where we tried to bring in new donors for the rescue that would hopefully give us some more financial support. We threw a big event for them.
Was your husband working that day?
Yes and no. He was working for part of the day, but he disappeared at some point.
What was his role that day at the fest?
So his main role was to give the closing remarks at the end of the day. At about 5 p.m., we were gonna bring all the donors and have Devin give a little speech to them, thanking them for coming out, things like that.
Did he give that speech?
He did not.
Why not?
Well, at some point throughout the day, he disappeared and didn't come back. He went to the Cat's Meow, which is a local bar.
Did you give that speech instead?
I didn't. One of my employees, Aidan Cooper, gave that speech in Devin's place.
How did Aidan do giving that speech?
He did phenomenal. I was very impressed with him. He really, you know, saved my skin. With Devin gone, and I definitely couldn't have given that speech. So I really needed someone to step up and, you know, take Devin's place, and Aidan really killed it.
Before Aidan was assigned to give the speech in Devin's place, was he already working that day?
He was helping out with the event.
Was the event a success?
Yes, it went off without a hitch, besides the closing remark fiasco.
Was the event overall important to New Catlin Rescue?
Definitely. We really, you know, the more donors we have, the more revenue we can bring in, the better businesses, the better we can perform as a business.
Aidan Cooper, the employee who helped you out that day by going above and beyond, how long had he worked for you up until that point?
7 years.
And how would you overall describe his work during those 7 years?
So he's a great employee. He's one of the best employees I've ever had. Definitely loyal. If I could hire 12 Aidan Coopers, I would. He's that great.
And did you let him out early that day?
I did. I ended up cutting him about an hour before his shift was supposed to end for a few reasons.
And what were those reasons?
So, you know, he really helped me out that day. So I figured I would reward him in some way and let him, you know, go home and relax. Also, he was supposed to be there the next day very early to start his next shift. So I figured go get an extra hour of sleep, come back tomorrow. It was also a thank you.
You said that Devin Lee went to the bar that day?
He did.
Do you recall what time he went to the bar?
No, not at all. Not exactly. Sometime before 5 p.m. he disappeared.
And did you stay at New Catlin Rescue after he left?
Yeah, Devin and I actually have a house that is on the New Catlin Rescue Sanctuary.
And what did you do once he left?
So after Devin left and the closing remarks happened, I ended up just, you know, finishing out the event and then cleaning up the event. And then I went and stayed in the office for a little bit.
Did Devin ever come back to New Catlin Rescue that evening?
He did around 8 p.m.
And how did he appear to you when he came back?
Just so drunk.
Had you seen him drunk before?
Yes, on numerous occasions, sadly.
Did you try to speak to him when he came back?
Yeah, I tried to talk about, you know, our relationship, and, you know, I found out that he was having an affair with me. I tried to talk about that, and he just had that look in his eye that he really just didn't care at that moment. So, and he didn't want to talk, and he just went for a walk.
Did you see where he went for that walk?
I don't know exactly where he went, but he was headed towards Katara's enclosure.
And how did this make you feel when he walked off?
I mean, I was sad, but I figured we would just pick up the conversation in the morning. We had our, you know, disputes in the past, and we've always worked them out. I didn't think this was going to be any different.
Did you go after him in person, follow him?
No, I didn't. He seemed like he wanted to be left alone, so I was honoring that and figured we'd pick up the conversation the next morning.
So what did you do after he left?
So I just went back to our house and went to bed.
Did you stop anywhere between the office and home?
I did not.
Did Devin contact you at any point after he left the office?
No.
Did Devin come back to the house that night?
No.
Did you see Devin at any point between the time he left the office and the time you went to bed?
No.
What happened when you woke up the next morning?
So I woke up to a scream, and Aidan called me, and Devin was found in Katara's cage.
And what did you do when you eventually got to the enclosure?
So it was horrible. I just saw Devin's body, and it was just mangled. It was, I'll never forget it. It was horrible. I remember the smell. I remember what I saw. It was so hard. I'll never forget it.
One final question for you, Charlie, and might I remind you, you are under oath. Was the first time that you saw him since he left the office that next morning? in the enclosure?
Yes.
No more questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Baker.
Good evening.
So you just testified that you and Mr. Lee had a fairly decent relationship, correct?
We had our ups and downs, but overall it was a very loving relationship.
But you and Devin did get into your arguments, correct? Your share of arguments?
Yes.
And you just stated that, I'm going to withdraw that question. Did you give an interview with the police on August 7th, 2021?
I did.
And you just stated in your previous testimony that when Devin was drinking, he just didn't want to talk, correct?
Yes.
So is it not true then that when Devin was drinking, you bickered a lot more?
We bickered a lot more, but the conversations were never productive.
Is it also not true then that when Devin would come home, he would pick fights with you?
It's different than talking.
So did you fight more when Devin was drunk?
Yes.
And in fact, during one of your arguments, when Devin was drunk, is it true that you locked Devin inside of a tiger cage? And the police are actually the ones who had to come to New Catlin Rescue to let Devin out of this locked tiger cage.
Yes, but he was never in any danger.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to show opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 16 for identification purposes. May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Baker, do you recognize what I just handed to you?
I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
It is a report.
What is it a report of?
It is a report of events that happened on October 17th, 2018.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of the report that was made when the police responded to New Catlin Rescue?
I believe so.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move to admit Exhibit 16 into evidence.
Right, any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, we object that this is not admissible under 404B. There's no real probative value to this. This happened many years ago. It's not at all related to the incident at hand. It's also extremely prejudicial.
All right, and your response?
Your Honor, it only happened about 3 years ago, and it's speaking to the nature of the defendant and the victim's relationship. And under 404B, it's being brought in to show just the opportunity, because in this case, the defendant locked Mr. Lee inside of a tiger cage while he was drunk and while they were arguing.
All right, I understand the argument. I'm going to allow the document in because there's already been testimony with regard to it that went in unobjected.
So this report states that when the police responded to this incident, Mr. Lee was in fact laying in an enclosure with 3 tigers, correct?
Yes, he was, but he was never in any danger.
You just said he was never in any danger, but it also says that Mr. Lee was not able to leave the enclosure as spouse Baker had the key to the fenced-in area and would not permit Devin Lee to exit, correct? That's what it says?
Yeah, it says that, but he was never in any danger. The cats loved him. Those cats didn't do anything to him. The cats.
But you locked him inside of a tiger cage, correct?
With cats that were very.
Please just answer with a yes or no.
Yes.
And he was not able to exit until the police got there and locked him out, correct?
Yes, but he was never in any danger.
Please just answer with a yes or no.
Yes.
And it also states that police were called there because neighbors heard screaming for over 2 hours at the rescue, correct?
Yes, the cats never touched him though.
Please just answer with a yes or no.
Yes.
So I'm going to turn your attention now to the events of March 7th, 2020. Do you recall this day?
I do.
And on this day, you just stated that Devin Lee left you alone to do this entire event, correct?
That's not true.
It's not true that Devin left you at this event on March 7th, 2020?
He did leave. I was not alone.
You also stated that you went into the office at some point to retrieve Devin's notes. And at that point, did you find Devin Lee's phone in the office?
I did.
And you also went through Devin's phone, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm showing opposing counsel has been pre-marked as Exhibit 3 for identification purposes. May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Baker, do you recognize what I've just handed to you?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
Some text messages and some highlights on the text messages.
Are they a fair and accurate representation of the text messages that you saw in Devin's phone on March 7th, 2020?
No, there's a lot of extra markings.
Are these representative of the text messages that you saw in Mr. Lee's phone on March 7th, 2020?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move to admit Exhibit 3 into evidence.
Is what he later saw different than Exhibit 3?
It's the same thing before. It was just a highlighted version that I meant to keep for myself.
Okay, all right. Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, we would object to this as hearsay.
All right, response?
Your Honor, this is not coming in for a truthful purpose. It's just coming in to show the effect on the hearer, Mr. Baker, when he was reading these messages. And he already spoke of the affair between Devin and these messages these messages.
All right, response to that argument?
We would just ask that the testimony be limited to the effect and not be used to prove the truth of the matter asserted.
All right, so I will allow this to come in for the purpose which you're requesting, which is the effect on the listener.
So turning your attention to these messages that you saw in your husband of 25 years' phone on March 7th, 2020. In these messages, it states on January 2nd, 2020, Devin says, I'm at TCM, come here. Did you know what TCM was?
I believe it's an abbreviation.
Do you know what it's an abbreviation for?
The Cat's Meow.
And what is the Cat's Meow?
It's a local bar.
And is that the bar that you knew that Devin Lee was at on March 7th, 2020?
Yes.
And these messages state that they're between your husband and someone named Lola, correct? At the top of each message, it says Lola.
Yes.
And also turning your attention to the second part of this exhibit, which is dated February 14th, 2020, there was an exchange of messages between your husband and Lola, correct?
That is correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I would just like the court to take judicial notice that February 14th is in fact Valentine's Day.
All right, so noted.
So on Valentine's Day, these messages indicate that your husband is texting Lola saying things such as, I wish I could have stayed at the motel longer, but I had to get back, correct?
Yes.
To which Lola responds, it's okay, love, we'll be together soon, correct?
Yes.
And then turning your attention to the third page of these exhibits, on February 28th, 2020, Devin says to Lola, I know you'll have all the money in the world when I sell and leave her, I promise, correct?
Yes, that is what it says.
So after you read these messages, you did know that your husband was having an affair with the person that he was texting.
Yes.
And while you were in the office at this time, did you also find bank transfers?
I did.
And did you look at these bank transfers?
I did.
Your Honor, I believe Exhibit 9 has already been admitted into evidence at this time. May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Do you recognize the document that I just handed to you?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
It is a account statement.
And does it say at the top of this statement that it's for Newcatlan Rescue?
It does.
And does it also say that the opening balance was $79,212 and the ending balance after that was only $32,979?
It does say that.
And 3 times on this bank transfer statement, does it indicate that withdrawals or transfers were made to an L Lovelace? Right towards the bottom.
Yeah, I think so. I don't really understand this document, but I think that is what it says.
So after finding out that your husband was having an affair through these text messages and realizing that your husband was withdrawing large amounts of money, you also stated that you just sat in the office contemplating your entire marriage, correct?
Yeah, it was a pretty, heartbreaking experience. So I thought about what the next steps would be, and I came to the determination that we could, talk this out and move past it.
And at the same time, while you're sitting in the office, just kind of waiting and contemplating your entire marriage, you also sent Hayden home, correct?
I don't know if those were at the same time.
Did you send Hayden home?
I did.
And it was for the first time in 7 years?
Yeah, he really helped me out that day.
Had Hayden helped you out before at the rescue as an employee for 7 years?
Not anything in the way that he helped me on that day. He really saved my skin.
But had he helped you out before at the rescue as an employee for 7 years?
Yes, not to that extent though.
And turning your attention back to Exhibit 3, it also indicates that you texted, and you indicate in your transcript that you texted Lola back from Devin's phone, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you said to Lola at 7:13 p.m. while you were sitting in the office and waiting around, he won't get away with this, correct?
Yeah, but I don't think it means what you think it means.
But you did text Lola that night on March 7th, 2020, right before your husband came home saying he won't get away with this, correct?
Yeah, but
Please just answer with a yes or a no.
Yes, but it's not what that means, what you're insinuating.
So from the time you sent Hayden home, after the event ended, you were alone at the rescue until 8 p.m. when he arrived home, correct?
As usual, yes.
And when Devin arrived home, nobody else was there except for you and Mr. Lee.
That's correct.
So after you found out about the affair and you found these bank transfer statements, you stated that you tried to talk to Devin, but then you just went to bed.
After he indicated that he did not want to have a conversation with me, I figured we'd pick it up in the morning, and then I went to bed, yes.
And Devin never came back home that night?
No, he didn't.
So you didn't notice until the morning time that your husband of 25 years never came home?
That's correct, I went to sleep.
You stated that you knew where you stated in the morning that you heard Hayden screaming, correct?
Yes.
And you knew to run when you heard the screaming toward Katara's enclosure, correct?
That's where I heard the screaming from, yes.
Your Honor, I believe Exhibit 1 has also already been admitted into evidence. May I approach the witness?
Yep.
Thank you. Do you recognize the document that I just handed to you?
It looks like a map.
Do you recognize it as a map of Newcatlan Rescue?
Yes.
So looking at this map of Newcatlan Rescue, can you tell me approximately how many enclosures there are on there?
7, I think.
And just to clarify, yours and Devin's home was right here next to the lion enclosure, and Katara's enclosure was all the way over here past the lion's enclosure and the other tiger enclosure, correct?
No, that's not correct.
Your home is located here, correct?
Yes, it is.
And let the record reflect, I'm pointing to Mr. Baker's home, which is next to the lion enclosure. And then Katara's enclosure is on the other end of the lion enclosure, correct?
Yes, that's correct. But the tiger enclosure is not in between them.
But you would have to go past the tiger enclosure to get to Katara's enclosure, correct?
Yeah, I guess so. Your question was just a little confusing. My apologies.
So you're stating that you heard Hayden screaming from your home located on the opposite end of the lion enclosure from Katara's enclosure, correct?
Yes, on the other side of the line enclosure was Katara's enclosure, yes. That's where the screams are coming from, yes.
And you also stated in your transcript that when you got to the scene on March 8th, 2020, the police had not yet arrived, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So you heard Hayden screaming all the way from there and ran to the enclosure, but you didn't hear Devin screaming as he was falling to his death the night before, correct?
The screams woke me up. I was asleep, I'm assuming, when whatever happened with Devin happened.
Well, you were sleeping during the night, weren't you?
So sleep cycles when you fall asleep.
It's a yes or no question.
Can you answer the question?
I feel like it needs some explanation, Your Honor.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
So you heard Hayden screaming and that's where you knew where to run, correct?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any redirects?
Yes.
Okay.
Charlie, the prosecution mentioned an incident with your husband being inside of a tiger enclosure a few years ago when he was drunk. You recall this?
Yes, I do.
Was Devin harmed in any way whatsoever when that happened?
No, the cats didn't touch him at all. The cats loved him. He really had a way with the cats when, well, most of the cats, I guess.
Okay. And when you sent that text message to Lola Lovelace that said, "You won't get away with this," what did you mean by that?
So what I meant by that was that he wouldn't get away with selling the New Catland Rescue. There's no way that he could have sold it. Him and I were both partial owners of it. Without my blessing, there's no way he was ever going to be able to sell the enclosure and fulfill whatever plans he might have had with her.
So at any point, did you genuinely believe that Devin had the ability to, on his own, sell New Catland Rescue?
No, not at all. There's no way he could have done that without me.
And they asked about employee Aidan Cooper being sent home for the first time in 7 years. How many times in those 7 years have you had a massive festival like the Cool Cats and Kittens Fest?
Never. This was the first festival we've ever had.
How many days in New Catland Rescue history was there an amount of work equal to that day?
0.
Okay. And as far as the morning of March 8th, 2020, they talked about the scream you heard from Aidan Cooper. At 7 a.m. in New Catland Rescue, how quiet is it?
It is very quiet. And also I'm waking up for the day. Like whatever, small noise it may be is going to wake me up.
No further questions.
All right. Any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. So you just stated that Devin would not be able to sell the rescue without you knowing or without you having any part in it.
That's correct, yes.
From the bank transfer, he was able to withdraw thousands and thousands of dollars without you knowing, correct?
That's correct, but he couldn't have sold New Catland Rescue without me.
But he was able to transfer money to L. Lovelace without you knowing or even giving permission for that, correct?
I mean, I know now, but sure, yes.
And you also just stated that New Catland Rescue was very quiet at 7 o'clock in the morning. So before the animals are fed, they're just quiet?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, very good. All right, the defendant can step down at this point in time. Your testimony is complete. You can just leave that there. Why don't we take a very short break just so everybody can assemble what they need to assemble before the closings, and then we'll proceed directly to the closing statements.
Oh, nice. Where is it?
No, it's actually what I your voice. It's not like, I was gonna try. I was like,
Yeah. Are you sticking around for the end?
Now I get to tell you.
Nice, thank you so much. Yes.
Just wondering, how much time do we have?
20 minutes. I don't know. I rely on your mom.
Never mind.
Yep, let's go. We're missing one juror.
Yeah.
All right, the jury is seated. We will now proceed to closing statements. Since the government has the burden of proof, they get to go last. So does the defense wish to make a closing statement at this point in time?
Your Honor, but before we do, we'd like to just renew the motion to dismiss that we reserved judgment on earlier.
All right, and I continue to reserve. I look forward to your closing.
Your Honor. Members of the jury, I wish there was one clean message I could ask you to take away from today's trial. But unfortunately, Devin's death was anything but clean. It was a mess that left us trying to pick up the pieces. And Devin's death was a tragedy, no doubt. And it's human nature to try to blame someone for such a tragedy. But the prosecution's eagerness to do so has only confounded that tragedy here today. And there's one thing we all need to acknowledge. Devin made a lot of mistakes. And I know that's tough to hear about someone who died, but multiple witnesses have told you just how much he drank. It was a problem that was only getting worse. And on the night in question, by all means, for what we've heard, it may have been his worst spender yet. He was at the bar drinking for hours that day. He was so drunk he forgot to pay his bill. So drunk his friend decided to get an Uber just to make sure he got home safe. Then he got home to face what would be many people's worst nightmare, their spouse confronting them on their affair. And in that state, with how much he drank, it's understandable that he thought he needed to get some air. And from there, only Devin knows what happened. And what happened next is one of the big mysteries of our time, because no one was there and no one knows what was going through Devin's mind. The evidence points to him going just next door to the animal rescue over to Katara's cage. He entered the cage, went up to the heights, and from there, tragedy. Was Devin's death a tragic accident? Well, all he drank that day would certainly point to that. Did Devin just make a poor decision to do something dangerous after he'd been drinking? It wouldn't be the first time. Aidan Cooper has told you that once Devin starts to drink, all his carefulness around the animals goes out the window. He's told you that on previous occasions, he's found Devin with limbs inside the tiger cage just passed out. And as Aidan Cooper has told you, there's not much room out there. And your own eyes back that up. With how much he drank, it's not only possible, but likely that he would have stumbled at some point. And that stumble sadly took him over the edge and to his death. Now, there is another theory how that night ended in tragedy. We've heard testimony that Devin was unhappy in his marriage, that Devin had been drinking more and more since the death of his parents, become unpredictable. The people closest to him had voiced concern for his well-being. Was Devin's death a suicide? It is very possible. In fact, that might be the most likely explanation for why he was even at Katara's cage to be in the first place that night. He hated and feared Katara. He wanted nothing to do with her. Maybe he didn't just stumble there accidentally, didn't wander along, wasn't lured there, wasn't pushed, but he went there with a purpose. Devin was in a bad place. With all he had to drink that night, he wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe he just couldn't face Charlie after what he'd done, and he found another way out. Now, the prosecution has their theory that blames Charlie for this tragedy. But at every turn, they run into one unfortunate truth. There's not one shred of proof to say that Charlie was involved in Devin's death. To have committed this crime in the way the prosecution has said, my client would have to be some criminal mastermind. Let's go through the mental gymnastics that would need to be true for the prosecution's case. He would have had to start his night so blinded in rage that he didn't care who he texted or what they saw. But then, by the time Devin got home, he suddenly transformed into a calculated, cold-blooded killer. He lured the very drunk Devin through the animal rescue and over to Katara's cage. The same Devin with a 0.21 blood alcohol content. And as I'm sure you know from your own experiences, luring drunk people anywhere can be difficult in the best of times. Certainly not when they're almost 3 times the legal limit. Certainly not when they have to go all the way up to Katara's cage, all the way around, and through the door onto the feeding platform. Then, somehow, in that what has been testified to as a clear and open space, he snuck up on Devin and pushed him in just the right way so he'd hit his head and die instantly with no chance of escape. Mike somehow did all this without leaving a single strand of evidence, not one fingerprint, not one witness to the fall. My client, who cares for big cats for a living, really must be a criminal mastermind. Somehow, he committed the perfect murder. Now, despite this lack of direct evidence, the prosecution has focused their entire case on a few scattered pieces of circumstantial evidence. They point to Devin Lee's affair, but as Charlie has testified, he wasn't looking to leave Devin Lee. He wanted to work on their marriage. He wanted to keep going and keep the decades-long marriage alive. He certainly wasn't looking to move on. They point to these monetary issues, but as Hayden and Charlie have said, Charlie was barely involved in the finances of the cat rescue. He wouldn't know enough about the financial situation to have a motive there. They point to letting Hayden go home early that day. But as Hayden himself has told you, that was done as a reward for stepping up on the biggest day in New Catlin history. Who would know better the motive than Hayden himself, who probably knows Charlie better than anyone alive? They point to the texts that Charlie sent. But all those do is prove exactly what Charlie said. He was going to have a conversation with Devin and put a stop to that affair. The prosecution wants to keep all your attention on motive and opportunity, so you don't pay attention to the fact that there's no actual proof here. Was their marriage perfect? Far from it. No marriage is. But sadly, issues of money and affairs, they plague many relationships. They may plague some of yours. That doesn't mean they all end in murder. I would submit that far more end in drunken mistakes. Now, how about the prosecution's supposed star witnesses? The medical examiner, in between trying to distance himself from his own report, stated that Devin's fall was consistent with an accident. Joe Eagle, the prosecution wants us to believe Joe Eagle. He has more baggage than Delta Airlines. He's been out to get my client since day one. Today's nothing different. Between hacking and trespassing, he's done everything he can to harass my client in his business. He has more to gain than anyone from Devin and Charlie going to jail. He said so himself that he would stand to make a lot of money if he went to jail. And even if we could somehow convince ourselves that Joe has changed his ways, he's here out of the goodness of his heart. He was drinking at the bar even longer than Devin was that day. Are we really supposed to believe he didn't misremember anything? Now, the night of March 7th is and may always be a mystery. Accident, murder, suicide, what really happened? Sadly, we may all have to accept that we'll just never know the truth. After hearing all this evidence, I hope you have some very real and very reasonable doubts as to what happened that night. We've looked at every piece of circumstantial evidence shown to you by the prosecution and shown just how easily it could all point to a different kind of tragedy, one of Devin's own making. I'd love to tell you that we have the smoking gun. It proves what happened that night, but sadly, it doesn't exist. No matter how badly the prosecution may wish it, they don't have it either. Now, in our justice system, it is a high bar to find someone guilty. And as well it should be. You're taking away their freedom and labeling them a murderer. And that's why we require the accused to be found guilty beyond all reasonable doubt. And that is a high bar. It is a bar completely on the prosecution to prove everything. The defense has no burden whatsoever. The prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which means if you can't just think it was possible, you can't even think it was more likely than not. You have to actually decide that no reasonable person could think that something else happened that night. And you are reasonable people. If you have some doubts after hearing all this evidence as to exactly what happened the night of March 7th, I don't blame you. At the same time, we can't blame Charlie either. Now, in a few short minutes, you're going to be asked to look at the evidence you've been provided. And you're going to have to make a decision as to what actually happened that night. And you're going to be faced with the one simple truth that we just don't have the evidence to say what happened. And when you see that, you'll have a duty to do one thing. Vote Charlie Baker not guilty, and let him go home to start mourning the death of his husband in peace. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, counsel. The state.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the reason we are in this courtroom today is not because of any accident. In fact, the reason that we're in this courtroom, Charlie Baker, the defendant, told us himself in these messages that Charlie Baker sent to Lola Lovelace on March 7th, 2020. And that was to say that Devin Lee will not get away with this. And in fact, Devin Lee did not get away with this, and Charlie made sure that Devin Lee would not get away with his affair or with his money. So that's why we're here today, because this was not any accident. This was in fact an act of first-degree murder. As my co-counsel stated previously, the defendant knew that the only person that could take everything away from him was the victim, Devin Lee. Devin Lee controlled the finances. Devin Lee was his husband for 25 years. And being the only person that could take everything away from the defendant made sure that he took care of Devin Lee before he was left with absolutely nothing. He saw his opportunity and he took it to brutally murder the victim. As you go into the jury room to deliberate, I do not want you to forget that we only have one victim in this case, and that is Devin Lee. The defense tried to paint Charlie Baker as a grieving widow, but Charlie Baker is the one who murdered Devin Lee, and the only victim here was pushed to his death. The judge will instruct you that first-degree murder has 3 elements, and these elements are the intent, the act, and the plan, which would also be premeditation or lying in wait. And again, the judge will instruct you on exactly what these elements mean. The people have the burden of proving each and every one of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And through our evidence and testimony here today, we have in fact proven these elements beyond a reasonable doubt to find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. First, we heard from the medical examiner, Dr. Ron Swanson, who told us that Devin Lee's death was no accident. He proved this to us by showing on the anatomy diagram that injury number 4 was sustained ante-mortem, meaning before the defendant died. This injury was different from injury number 11, which was the fatal blow that occurred to Devin Lee's head when he was sent off that platform and hit the boulder. So for injury number 4 to have occurred ante-mortem before Devin Lee died, something would have had to have happened to Devin Lee before he was sent off that platform. And then turning your attention back to the picture of the enclosure, which is exhibit number 11, the medical examiner in his expert testimony also pointed out to us how far away, when he examined this enclosure, the boulder that Devin Lee was found on was from the actual platform. There was no possible way that the victim could have simply fallen to his death accidentally. This was a homicide. His body ended up all the way out here and not directly under the enclosure. The only thing that Devin Lee's blood alcohol content in this instance was interacting with was not Toprol XL, which was never even found in his body. The only thing that impacted Devin Lee's drunken state was the defendant, Charlie Baker, taking advantage of it and pushing him off of that platform. The medical examiner concluded with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty after considering all factors, including suicide, that this was in fact an act of homicide. And that was an expert that was recognized by this court. That was his final conclusion. We next heard from Joe Eagle, who had been friends with Devin Lee for the last 22 years. Devin met up with Joe Eagle often at the local bar, the Cat's Meow, which was the same place that he saw Devin Lee on March 7th, 2020. They were such good friends despite the instances that they tried to bring up that showed strife between Mr. Baker and Joe Eagle, that Joe Eagle still stayed friends with Devin Lee for 22 years. They talked about his marital problems and they talked about his business problems. And that's how Mr. Eagle knew about Lola Lovelace and knew that Devin Lee would never have gone towards that tiger, Katara. Joe told us that he began seeing Devin and Lola together out in public in late 2019. And he also told us that the defendant, Charlie Baker, purchased Katara in December of 2019, which was completely against anything that Devin Lee wanted with Katara. He said that cat was too dangerous to ever be at New Catlin Rescue. And finally, before Mr. Eagle parted ways with Mr. Lee at the Kitzrow on March 7th, 2020, they had a conversation about what Devin Lee's intentions were when he arrived back to the rescue that night. He was going to tell Mr. Baker that their marriage of 22 years was, or 25 years was over. He was leaving the defendant for Lola Lovelace. He was taking their money and he was probably going to start a new business with it. So I just want you to let that sink in for a moment. Right before the victim was found dead, on that same night, the last person that he talked to told us that he was on his way home to end his marriage. And the last person to see the victim alive was the defendant when he was going home to tell him that their marriage was over. Next, we heard from Aidan Cooper, who, as the defense's own witness, told us that Devin was terrified of Katara, told us that Devin was terrified of heights, told us that Devin would never even go near Katara. And Aidan Cooper had worked for both Devin and Charlie Baker for the last 7 years. So he told us about what their relationship was like. And on the day of March 8th, 2020, he told us that the defendant just appeared on the scene almost out of nowhere, just must have heard his screaming. The defense wants you to believe that Charlie Baker, all the way from his house behind those other enclosures, heard Aidan Cooper screaming at Katara's enclosure and knew exactly where to run, even though the police weren't even there yet. The reason the defendant knew where to run on March 8th, 2020 and find Devin Lee's body is because the defendant is the one that put him there. And finally, we heard from the defendant himself. The defendant has crafted his own story for us to try to convince you against expert testimony that this was not an accident and that this was in fact homicide. They want to convince you that Devin Lee was really drunk and nearly fell on March 7th, 2020, when in fact, the defendant planned to be the only one at New Catlin Rescue when Devin Lee arrived home at 8 o'clock that night, waited in the office for Devin Lee to arrive home, and contemplated his entire marriage. And then when the victim arrived home at 8 o'clock that night, the defendant did what the defendant had done before and lured an inebriated Devin into a tiger's enclosure and pushed him to his death. Only this time, the only difference between this incident and the same exact one that occurred in the past was that nobody was around to call the police as Devin was being pushed to his death. The defendant told us that he wanted to talk to Devin, and Joe Eagle told us that Devin's purpose of going home was to also talk to the defendant. So it doesn't make much sense when the defendant tells us that Devin Lee just walked away from him. The whole reason that Devin left the bar that night was to talk to the defendant. So the story just isn't adding up. If we're using our common sense to see all of these inconsistencies in the defense's story, it just doesn't make any sense. The defendant bought the most dangerous tiger, Katara, that New Catlin Rescue had ever had in late 2019. We heard from Joe Eagle that Devin started going out in public with his girlfriend in December of 2019. And just a short 3 months later, Devin was found dead inside of that same dangerous tiger's enclosure. That doesn't sound like a coincidence. That sounds more like a plan to me. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you cannot overlook or ignore, like I said, these inconsistencies in the defendant's story. These are not just coincidences. These are the elements of first-degree murder, which the judge will instruct you on and explain in other words what these actually mean. We're not asking you to believe some theory or some story. We have presented evidence, facts, and testimony to prove to you beyond reasonable doubt exactly what happened to the victim, Devin Lee, on March 7th, 2020. We urge you to find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you for your time, patience, and attention this evening.
All right, thank you, Counselor. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, now is the time. I told you before that you were not to deliberate, but now is the time to deliberate. You've been provided with a copy of the jury instructions, which counsel's noted. I'm not going to read them here into the record. I am going to ask you to retire to discuss amongst yourselves what you feel the results should be in this case and report back to us through your jury foreperson. All right, is there anything further that the defense wants me to address?
No, Your Honor.
Right, anything further for the people?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and deliberate and get back to us now when you made a decision.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. Now I know we're on a quick break while the jury deliberates outside. During this time, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the people who have made this competition possible and give out a few certificates tonight. So I have a lot of people to thank. As Tegan mentioned in her introductory remarks, these moot court competitions take a lot of behind the scenes work. And you know, this problem wouldn't be possible with these individuals that helped me along the way. First and foremost, I would like to thank my associate, Jaclyn. Jaclyn's over there. And so as I echoed in, you know, my introductory remarks, Jackie really had the idea of, hey, maybe we should do a Tiger King problem. We kind of move the ball along in that realm. And she's just been a great resource for me, helping me when I need things, you know, scheduling judges and communicating, doing a lot of the behind the scenes work. So Jackie, I thank you. And I'm so glad we had the opportunity to do this together. So next is on my list, Professor Jim. Professor Jim is sitting right there, and he is the faculty advisor for senior prize trials. Now, Professor Jim helped, you know, instill the confidence in me that I thought that I needed to write a problem of this caliber. He is a great mentor and professor, and his, you know, legal mind in helping me write this case was paramount in making this competition awesome for you four here today. So thank you, Professor Jim. Next is Teresa Colbert. She's not here tonight, but Teresa is the kind of glue behind the moot court program. She is our faculty advisor, another, you know, behind the scenes individual, and she's great. And, you know, hats off to Teresa. I wish she could have been here tonight. Individuals, John Collins for always, you know, being able to be there to reserve rooms for the competitions, Bill Purcell in IT, John Kalinsky with getting the wonderful awards for our competitors, Julie Pierce in printing, and Nicole Bazona just as a second hand whenever I needed her. And just everyone else at Albany Law School who is contacted each year by a new chair for your help in navigating unfamiliar tasks. Next is the moot court board. They're all here tonight, and I want to thank each and every one of them for being willing to step in and lend a helping hand when I'm in a pinch. So thank you to the moot court board. Next, and perhaps most importantly, all of our volunteers in this competition. This is a student-run competition, and all the witnesses and jurors and bailiffs that you see here tonight are volunteering their time out of their law school schedule. Many of them first-year students who are just starting to navigate law school and its wonders. And they're coming here tonight to take 3 to 4 hours out of their time. So that is just something that we're very grateful for. So thank you to them. Finally, I want to thank all of the competitors. I know I see some of you in the back tonight, the competitors, not just in our final round, but our quarterfinalists, semifinalists, and just everybody who actually decided to do senior prize trials, which is a competition during your 3rd year and requires a lot of work, when I know a lot of you would most likely not wanting to be doing something like this. So thank you, and you should all be very proud of yourselves. So with that, with the mention of our competitors, I want to head over to the award table and hand out certain certificates for our quarterfinalists, semifinalists, and best oral advocate.
Okay. Tegan,
There we go. Sorry about that. All right, so when I call your name, you can come down and grab a certificate. So our quarterfinalists for this competition, Alicia Bimani. Connor M. Judd. Oh yeah.
Right, she needs to get the book.
Newport.
And have a Lucy. Kristen A. Davis. Christina F. Vitolo.
Daniel. Okay, now moving on to our second finalists. We have Jenny E. Evangelista. Katarina R. Treasy. Elise and Coons. And her partner, Jaclyn Shapiro. Okay, and now we're on to the best oral advocate award. There are third best oral advocate, second best oral advocate, and first, obviously. Now, the oral advocate award is based on the combined scores of the 2 preliminary rounds of 1 together. So for third place, we actually had tied Nora Baker. And Brittany A. White. For second best oral advocate, Christina Aguilera. Okay, best oral advocate. Now, this individual displayed an amazing advocacy skills in throughout the entire competition, not only in the rounds, and that goes to Jeff Shapiro. Thank you so much, and congrats to all our competitors. At this time, the jury will be brought back in to render a
I'd all rise for the jury. All right, be seated. All right, has the jury returned a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor. The defendant is not guilty of murder in the first degree.
All right, very good. Congratulations. All right, well done. I'm up. All right. Well, as my daughter would say, yowza. So, I mean, this was fantastic. I always like this competition. You know, you work so hard in what you do. You really did a phenomenal job. You know, the closings were exceptional. I was really impressed with the introduction of the evidence and the way that you, on direct examination, got all the necessary information. I'll talk with you privately if you wish after we're done and we're down having a beer or whatever the next process is. But since I stand in the way of us getting to that situation, I'm required to advise who I believe won the competition. And wowza. Yeah, all four of you are welcome in my court any day. You're welcome on my court every day. Based upon my analysis, I have found in this particular competition favor of the prosecution, at least of Nora. So congratulations to both of you.
I won't keep you too long from the beer either, but this is actually a special moment, and I withheld this fact from Judge Stewart as I did not want to influence his decision-making. A bit of moot court history, or senior prize trial history, was made tonight. The records that I have go back to 1999. Tonight is only the second time in 1999 that the winners of the senior prize competition were also the winners of the Gabriele competition. The last time that happened was 14 years ago. So we'll see how long this record lasts. But congratulations to all of the competitors. Special congratulations to Nora and Lisa.
And with that, congratulations to both teams. You're all free to head down to our reception, which is taking place outside of the law school in the tent. We have food and drinks, so we have some moot court members that will guide you down if you don't know, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I didn't know about this. I did not want to make you listen.
Oh, thank you.